Dragons have always been a hallmark of avarice and greed. They hoard things.
It is a cybernetic monstrosity.
Is basically Smog meets the Xenomorph.
They actually do expect you to put your players against dragons at pretty low and medium level.
Daggerheart is a game written for and by theater people.
This dragon is like their closest thing to a god.
I love D&D. It was my gateway into tabletop RPGs, and like a lot of people, it shaped so much of how I imagine things like magic, adventuring, and dragons. But over the years, I've become more and more curious about other TTRPGs and what they could bring to the table, the gaming table, so to speak. So in this video, I wanted to explore a few TTRPGs that I personally didn't know much about, and speaking of how much my perception of dragons has been molded by D&D, I thought that looking at these TTRPGs through the lens of their dragons would be a great place to start. Because dragons are iconic. Whether you think of Smaug, or Thordak, or Puff, we all carry this kind of mental claw mark for what a dragon should be and should act like. But different systems implement dragons in different ways. And my hope is that those differences will tell us a lot about the system itself. So, rather than me trying to research this on my own and pitch you on what I think the dragon is like in this system, I reached out to creators. Some were the actual developers of the systems themselves, and some were just people that were deeply familiar with these TTRPGs. And I asked them to either find or create a dragon in their system of choice. Then we sat down and had an interview to talk about what made these dragons unique and how they reflected the unique character of the system. Now, the interviews that you'll see in this video are very shortened. It's already quite long, I'm sure you can tell, but if I hadn't cut down the interview substantially, it would have been closer to like 8 hours, and I knew that no one would want that. However, if you are interested in seeing more of these interviews, don't worry. I'll be releasing longer versions of each of them to the channel over the coming months, so subscribe to make sure that you catch those. And also, a quick note, some of the interviews ended up being cut down more than others. It's not a reflection of their quality. Every single interview was amazing. It was fantastic. But the ones that ended up shorter were more about what fit cleanly in the edit and what I could like coherently tie all together. So with that said, let's dive into some dragons. Well, hello, Mike. Welcome.
Hello.
I wanted you in from the start, and I decided later that I wanted us to talk about D&D, because we're going to be talking about a lot of TTRPGs in this episode, which I am all very, very excited for, but I also want kind of a broad baseline for the audience, because I think, more likely than not, if you've played a TTRPG and you're watching this video, more likely than not, it's D&D. And so talking about, I think the dragon stat block, it's in the name of the system.
Let's start with 5e 2024 or 2014 5e.
Absolutely.
So there's 20 chromatic dragon stat blocks in the monster manual. And there's also the metallic dragons, but I don't care about them because I think they're boring. So we're only going to talk about the chromatic dragons today. And we're going to focus on the iconic dragon, the red.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we're not really going to worry about the wormling and the young, because I think those are interesting, but those are very clearly like, oh, people want to fight dragons, and also games don't go very long.
I am somewhat of the opinion, because no other TTRPG I've looked at for this video has dragons of differing age.
That's true.
And the only one that I interviewed that did have dragons of differing age, it was the actual, the wormling stat block was just 3 modifications to the main stat block. It literally just said like lower this number this much, lower that number.
Too dissimilar from what they do with the young and the wormling in D&D. It's more straightforward. It's work that they do on their end instead of putting it on the GM.
Yeah. But I think there's something to be said for the fact that they don't feel, or it wasn't seen as maybe directly feasible to just say, make these modifications to the core stat block. They had to spin up totally separate stat blocks. To me, that says something about like the ability to lower or raise the CR of any given monster and have it still kind of survive.
I think that's part of it. I honestly think it's partly because 5e is not an easy system for you to make adjustments to on your side. Like, they really have to give you new stat blocks. It also speaks to the fact that they actually do expect you to put your players against dragons at pretty low and medium level. I think mechanically, these are very straightforward monsters at early levels. You know, the young dragon, it's multi-attack, it's got a bite, it's got a claw, it's got fire breath, recharges 5 to 6, which appears in all the stat blocks. It's recharged 5 to 6, because you want it to still be able to breathe fire a lot. But you don't want it to breathe fire every round, and you don't want there to be spell slots with their fire breath. So you have it on a recharge where it's going to happen about every 3 turns, approximately.
And how do you feel about, let's go broad, because they're not very common at low levels, so besides with dragons, so some DMs might not be familiar with them, recharge abilities. Broadly, so not using a similar thing to like a class resource. These are things that you're getting back all the time throughout a battle.
I do enjoy that moment of, oh, and its ability recharges. And the players realize, oh, this is going to be a rough round. And not necessarily knowing that going in, because we get very little randomness in a lot of stat blocks for monsters. And I don't mind that. I think easier, more fun monsters are very straightforward. People use average damage a lot because it's faster and it's easier, and it just take a lot of the guesswork out. But I do kind of like the unpredictability of, oh yeah, you don't know when it's going to happen, but you know this dragon's going to breathe fire on you again. And recharge 5 to 6 is a nice range, I think, because it is pretty likely unless you're having a really rotten night. So we get the fire breath with all these dragons. We get the addition of multi-attack when we get to the young dragon, because, you know, at this point, they're at the level where we have to start challenging the heroes more. Where we get to the adult dragon is where we start getting some stuff that makes a lot of sense, like the legendary actions, which in this case is, I'm not wild about it, but it makes sense, is a perception check is the first legendary action, which I guess is just to try to find hidden enemies. I don't know that I would have thought to make that necessary of making it a legendary action, but on the other hand, it is kind of nice that the dragon isn't going to waste a turn trying to find the person who's going after them. Like, it's a nice option. I don't love it, but I don't know that I hate it. It's like, I understand the logic behind it.
And do you think
then you have a tail attack as another legendary action is just a tail attack, and the third, which is 2 actions, is a wing attack where it beats its wings and knocks people down, and they take some bludgeoning damage, and I like that one a lot.
The one that I want to highlight especially, because I talk quite often about on my channel about the concept of a white room combat. A combat in which it's just adversaries and allies, and there's nothing else, and you're just in a white room, so to speak. Even if, in some weird scenario, the Dragon Lair is a white room, which I don't think it should be, at least something like the volcanic gas provides some amount of variance to the terrain where players want to stand. It provides not physical cover, but essentially vision cover by obscuring the area. So I like the volcanic gas one quite a bit, especially if you really hone in on its obscuring nature. The poison is fine, but I like that one a lot.
Well, and the thing I like about the magma is it encourages layer design. It either says there should be open magma here or like fumaroles, which for those who don't know the term, the beginning of The Lion King, when they shove Zazu into the little pot, the hyenas, those things that burst gas, the things that burst up smoke during Scar's speech, those are called fumaroles. And so like something like that, just having a point on the map where geyser can appear, or where geyser of magma can appear, encourages layer design. And there's some descriptions as well of like, you know, what kinds of things you might find in a dragon's lair, which again they flesh out more in Fizbands because that book really has a lot more layers in it.
Yeah.
Both versions of layer, because it's got layers. Is that anything? We'll say yes.
You know, maybe it'll go in the edit. I don't know.
But it doesn't really like. The one thing I kind of wish was present is either, you know, maps in the back of the book or something. You know, just a little bit more. But honestly, I think that the layer actions, generally speaking, I'm sure we could nitpick individual ones.
Sure.
But generally, you can look at the layer actions and get a sense for what will make a good layer.
I do, to a degree, worry about, like you were talking about how the magma burst ability encourages good layer design. But I just watched a video of a fight where the magma burst was just kind of random and just kind of happened in some vague areas and didn't, and so I do sort of wish, and I think I've seen a couple of people talk about something like this, that some of the lair actions had more almost MMO-like tells, where it is like,
sure, yeah.
These spots start to bubble and then they burst, or separate from that there was more direct guidance on layer design, even if they don't give you a map.
I can definitely see the argument of like, hey, what if, layer actions happen on initiative count 20? What if on initiative count 10, you start foreshadowing which layer action might appear next time?
Absolutely.
So they know what's coming, or they can start to get some sense. Sure. But it does kind of tie together with like the problem of foreshadowing in D&D in general. Like, how do you make sure there's foreshadowing? Because that's something they do talk about is regional effects, to make sure that the area around a layer for like, I think it's something like 6 miles for the most part. Well, it depends. So like small earthquakes are common within 6 miles of a red dragon's lair. But within 1 mile, the water sources are tainted with sulfur, rocky fissures form portals to the elemental plane of fire. That's all awesome. I think we should see the plane of fire represented in the layer itself, so there's a little bit of like a disconnect there, and it kind of speaks to the other issue with dragons in general, which is a lot of that sort of emanation and presence and aura is in the surroundings and its narrative environment, but it's not mechanically introduced except for the fear aura.
Right. Yeah.
There's a great video by Matt Colville where he talks about if you were hypothetically fighting a villain named Sordak the Lava Lord, and you had a party of 15th level warriors called Pax Machina, and you realize partway through the fight, oh, it's just a big bag of hit points. Here's the stuff to steal from 4th edition that makes it more elemental and more frightening and like more refined, and basically just talks about how 4th edition was better than 5th edition at specifically like monster design and making the narrative more exciting.
I mean, I know one of my favorite this feels wrong to even say, but 5e home rules, table rules, is just a rule from 4th edition. I love the minionize rule, where you can take any adversary and, make it much easier to pilot as a GM, especially if you want to pilot a ton of them. And it gives you guidance on how to do the math for that. And so I do think that is a larger point of, we're talking about 5th edition, we're talking about the 2 editions of 5th edition. But D&D hasn't changed so much that you can't still look at older editions, especially to yoink bespoke things. They're really not that difficult to massage into 5e.
Very much by design with 5e. 5e is designed to have 1 foot in, this is going to sound like sacrilege to the people who actually are part of the OSR and the old school Renaissance, but it has 1 foot in the, I will say, trappings and charts and things like that of the old school version of D&D. Maybe not so much the OSR culture and how they play today. Maybe that's not really translated, but sort of like the trappings and superficiality of original D&D.
I mean, something I would identify is something like damage types, which are barely utilized in 5e, but they, like you said, present kind of the trappings of that older school mentality.
Or even things like we have the vestiges of alignment mattering. It doesn't not matter in 5e. It just almost doesn't matter. And that feels like because they have 1 foot in the old school version of the game and 1 foot in the sort of modern design that really drove I would say 3rd edition and 4th edition in very different directions, but the idea of like pushing forward into something that's more streamlined, especially 4th edition, trying to make it easier to run. 4th edition was extremely easy to build encounters and run as a game master in a way that 5e is not. And I think that there are attempts on their behalf to try to simplify it, and the way they designed it is just not enough like 4th edition to make it play like 4th edition. But you can steal from 4th edition because 5e has enough in common with it in a way that 4e didn't have anything in common with 3 or 2 or 1 or the other editions, to the fact that it should have just been called Dungeon Action Game. And it would have sold like gangbusters. They called it D&D, and people were like, that's not D&D, this is a superhero game. And they didn't think of D&D as a superhero game. Well, part of the reason that 5e kind of feels like a superhero game, starting at 5th level and on especially, is because it still has a foot in 4th edition and the sort of modern gaming and modern storytelling.
And I want to present that, you can have broad opinions about, design philosophy and how good or bad that is, but in the practical reality of you at home as a GM, go and steal some shit from 4th edition. Like, if there's something bothering you about D&D, go look in some older editions, and there's plenty there that is really not hard to port. And then the sort of last thing that I wanted to hit on in terms of the running away thing. You're an incredibly experienced DM. You've played in several systems. You played a lot of 5e. You're still talking about how it's tough for you to remember. I talk about it all the time on stream. My chatters are constantly saying how tough it is for them to remember that. And all that is to say, the system's not going to do it for you. This is not a system where you're making morale checks. This is not something where the book is going to give you, keyworded motivations or keyworded tactics. It's not going to tell you really how to run the monster strategically. Even to go back to us talking about the stat blocks earlier, the original stat blocks are kind of built in mind of you knowing how to run them strategically, but they do not tell you how to do that. It's kind of on you.
And the presence of opportunity attacks makes it hard for characters to move around. It just restricts movement at the table.
Yeah.
So something like the dragon is kind of unusual, especially for low levels, of a character that's actually going to move around a lot.
Yeah.
And to put sort of a bow on this, it's just talking about all these different systems that you're playing. I don't imagine it depends on your group is said as often in other conversations as it is in 5e.
Sure.
Because 5e is the one that's trying to do the most for the most groups.
I agree.
Whereas if you come along and you say, hey, did you not like that? Try this game. Did you not like this? Try that game. Because that's sort of the role of D&D right now. I mean, obviously with people like me who still play it and enjoy it and like it.
Absolutely.
But in a lot of conversations
and DMing it right now. Yeah.
But the selling point of a lot of other systems in just common parlance in the community is if you don't like X, try that game.
Yeah.
If you're not enjoying this part of D&D 5e, you should try D&D 4e, Pathfinder, whatever it is, and there's a selling point for all of them, which kind of puts D&D in this awkward middle of the tug of war part, and they absolutely put themselves there.
Oh yeah.
Let's part of it is that they have the brand recognition, so they want to be all things to all people, but they also chose to be, right? Because when they weren't all things to all people, like with 4th edition, people really didn't like it, despite the fact that they were trying to make the game people were actually playing, but people don't like being told how to play, by D&D especially.
Yeah.
They don't like being told, listen, you don't count feet, you count squares. We just went back to squares. Well, hey, I wanted it to be feet. You weren't
each
using
of my
feet.
Squares are 10 feet. What do you mean?
You weren't using feet that way. You were using 5-foot squares. It's a 5-foot square game. You weren't playing evil characters. It doesn't matter that you weren't playing chaotic good. You were playing lawful good, neutral. And they cut like 3 or 4 alignments and told you couldn't play evil characters because you weren't.
Yeah.
According to what they were seeing in the direction of the storytelling that was being done in 3.5 and 3rd edition, all the the supplements they were putting out, the way the game was going.
Yeah.
So they tried to make the game they thought people wanted, and they didn't want that because it was D&D. And D&D is supposed to be, for some people will watch Critical Role and be like, that's not D&D. Some people watch the D&D movie and go, that's not D&D. That's not what D&D looks like. So my games look like. My games have looked like the whole time. My earliest games in 2014 when I just started with or 2015, no, even going back to when I started running 40.
Yeah.
2010, 2012. They looked exactly like the D&D movie.
Yeah.
To a T. So, but for some people, that's just not D&D to them.
Yeah.
Because that's the premise of their problems with the game. Is that it doesn't do that. It does this other thing.
And there's there's an amount of, one of the reasons I want to make this video is to show people other TTRPGs. There are tons of them, and a lot of them are amazing and probably maybe do the thing that you're looking for that D&D doesn't do. But on the other side of that, D&D does have a lot of things. It has a lot of options. It has a lot of versatility. And the way that I was introduced to other TTRPGs was not by being brought into a session with someone else. It was by saying, I want to run a heist in D&D, and I looked up how to do that, and I found Blades in the Dark mechanics, and I didn't play Blades in the Dark for years after that, but I used those mechanics in my D&D game, and they worked. Because D&D kind of can accept, in the same way that you can steal from old editions, you can steal from a lot of other games without fucking with D&D too much.
And that's very much by design for 5e. It's designed to be a modular game.
Despite 5e's modern modularity, that's somewhat of a recent development and had some driving motives outside of just being flexible. It wasn't built with that flexibility in mind from the ground up. So next, I wanted to look at something that was built with that flexibility from the ground up. Hello, Jason Durall. Thank you so much for joining us here today. We're going to talk about a system that it seems like has been your somewhat of a baby, kind of pet project of yours for many, many years. And I have heard you called many things in regards to it. Creative director, line editor. Would you describe your relationship with BRP over the years? It's a little bit of its history and a little bit of your history.
Okay, so BRP was the brainchild of a guy named Steve Perrin, who was initially, it stemmed from, as many of our game designs and game designers are born, he took a look at Dungeons & Dragons, the very first edition, and he said, I can do better than this. And so it was inevitably a lot of changes and modifications to the rules, and then eventually it sort of codified into a system that he liked that was much more intuitive and a little more grounded in reality. Sure. I would say that, and it's not a slight about D&D at all. But D&D tends to be about the system itself. The rules refer to the system. The system is its own thing. It's not really trying to emulate reality. It's trying to work, like the system holds.
Right. Yeah.
All the parts contribute to the system rather than sort of using reality as a baseline.
Yeah, I think there's a really easy example of I think the intuition of any given D&D player is that, a bonus action sounds faster or easier than a normal action. So why can't I use my normal action to do something that requires a bonus action? That would make intuitive sense, but can't do it.
Right. And BRP was designed at the get-go to be a very intuitive game system. So like you use percentile dice for your chances to do most things. And it's easy to say, like, I swing a sword at him, I have a 75% chance to hit.
The entire system of BRP, it seems, at least, on kind of gut take from me, it seems the defining trait is flexibility. Maybe modularity, you might say.
Absolutely.
And I even saw that just in the dragon that you sent over. We've got the core dragon, page that's maybe one column, and then
Right.
5 more columns of heritages.
This is something that hasn't been announced yet. So I'm not
Oh,
going to name it by name. You're getting a sneak preview here.
okay.
But yes, this is a book we've got that has, well, it will have a lot more stats about dragons in it,
Yeah.
among many, many other creatures. And yeah, so there's, in this case, rather than writing like 15 different types of dragons, we decided to take the core dragon system and sort of use it as the chassis that we could like pop on pieces, kind of like a, you know, a modular. It's a very,
Yeah.
like you say, a very modular system.
Yeah.
We could sort of like, okay, modify the creature this way, and this way to end up with a, you know, a shadow dragon, and this way, this way to get an ice dragon. And so, yeah, so I wrote up, I'm actually drawing a blank on how many there are. 11.
11. Oh my gosh, yeah.
It goes to 11. Yeah, in addition to the standard one.
Well, and that's kind of revolves around one of my first questions is BRP is so flexible, so modular. How easy would you say it is? You know, you talked about you were running all of these settings just using this core system. If you wanted to spin up a new dragon, just say for your home game, you know, you're not putting it to print for other people, how quick would you estimate? Obviously, you're biased. You know the system very well.
Sure.
But how quickly, if you wanted to spin up, say, like a spectral dragon, I mean, do you think that's like on the fly for you to just like...
I don't know if I would say on the fly, because I'd like to know a few things about it, you know, like how exactly, you know, I need to make a few decisions. Like, is it immaterial? What kind of attacks affect it? What don't? So there's a little bit of stuff, but on the whole, I mean, you could probably like spend 15 or 20 minutes and have it statted out in a way that players could go, oh, he's got something written on his on his sheet, rather than, you know, sometimes if you're playing and the GM is kind of like answering questions,
willy-nilly.
You don't really have stats for this thing, do you? You're just kind of guessing. Well, no, you could have a pretty reasonably statted out cool spectral dragon, I guess, without much difficulty at all.
One of the things I wanted to really ask is, in a lot of systems that I have seen, adversary design is often simplified to make it both, you know, easy to create and I think more pertinently easy to pilot in the moment for a GM, especially if you're controlling, you know, multiple adversaries all at once. I have an idea for how this might work out in BRP, but I wanted to get your kind of gut reaction to that. With the adversaries being, you know, constructed of the same core stuff as the PCs, how do you find that affects the piloting, maybe difficulty or complexity for the GM actually running them in the moment?
I would say that, I mean, I personally feel that it's easier because, for example, I would say that, like, I'll just use D&D as an example because frequently these two are sort of balanced against each other.
And I think it's the thing that most of the audience is going to be familiar with. Yeah.
Like most versions of D&D are exception-based rule systems where you've got a core mechanic, but then creature abilities are always exceptions to that, or you know, your ability lets you do something that's not standard to the rules.
Right.
And so frequently, like high level monsters or large numbers of very variant monsters are going to be using all of these exceptions, and you have to keep track of those. Whereas for RuneQuest or basic role playing or Age of Vikings creatures, you're generally dealing with, you know, a very similar tool set to what the player characters are dealing with. And so the same kind of modifiers will affect monsters as player characters. In some cases, they're even using the same magic that player characters are using.
I was watching another interview that you did regarding BRP. I think it was before the book had gone to print. And there was a really quick, like, you said it and it went past, you know, blink and you miss it sort of comment that stuck in my brain immediately, which was, I believe you were talking about the fate point system, and how it's relatively analogous to Call of Cthulhu's luck points. And you made a comment of like, so for people who don't think that there's, this luck system or that type of system in BRP, it's there. It's been there for 15 years.
Yeah.
That, to me, and again, always correct me if I'm wrong, it sounds like there's maybe been potentially some sort of issue with people not necessarily knowing everything that's in the book, the big gold book maybe, or this one. How did you, especially as the line editor, the creative director, how did you try to account for that in this new edition of just trying to make sure that people are aware of all of the options? Because there's so many in the book.
Right.
You want to make sure that they get it all.
I tried to cross-reference as often as I can. And that meant, like, if I did something and I said, oh, like, if you want to run this kind of a game, you're probably going to want to use the luck system,
Okay.
or the fate point system. If you're using this kind of a game, if your game is all about like tactical skirmishing and very gritty, like lots of visceral combat, you're probably going to want to use hit locations and like where you basically got per limb hit points broken into your body. So you can have a results like somebody attacks you and you parry with your shield and their attack is so powerful that it goes through your shield and breaks your arm.
Yeah.
Sort of like Eowyn fighting the Witch King in the, where he shatters her shield.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And BRP is fantastic for creating those kinds of results. I mean, I know that we were doing one of the early playtests of the last version of RuneQuest, and with some complete newcomers to the game. And when a creature criticaled, they parried, and the blade like just cut through their shield, shattered it, and damaged their arm. The player was like, "I have never had that happen in a game. Oh my god!" And the character's got his arm down, and he can't fight, and he's fighting with his left hand with his right hand only.
That's got to be such a great moment to hear. I've never had that happen before.
Yeah, it's just so very intense and new and real to people. They get that sense of immediacy, whereas, sometimes the abstraction of some kinds of game systems don't lend that.
Yeah, they don't lend that kind of visceralness, even if you get maybe something in that vein. Like I've played quite a bit of Blades in the Dark. I really like that system, but there is certainly a level of, you might say, almost arbitrary kind of ness with what the harm is, and that can be great for flexibility in storytelling, but it doesn't get you those kind of procedural, intense moments.
Yeah, it's like you stabbing somebody through the chest.
Yeah.
That feels like a very specific thing to happen, or cutting off somebody's leg in the middle of a combat, or, having a broken limb, or, having a blow to the head causing unconsciousness.
Absolutely,
that kind of stuff. So, depending on how detailed BRP is going, that's the kind of stuff you can get. And so, to answer your question there, the rules basically, and the the various source material that we're working on, whenever a relevant optional rule or one of these other flavors comes up, it's usually like, hey, you might want to think about this when you do this. And so it's always kind of pulling in a sort of just tapping you on the shoulder as a game master and saying, like, this might be important.
Yeah.
You consider that if you hadn't noticed it before.
Yeah. And for say, someone who is watching this, they've maybe only played D&D, maybe they're only, they haven't gotten to play too many TTRPGs in general. If you're saying, if they say to you, I want to GM BRP, where do they start? Do they just crack open the book, page 1, and read it linearly, or what would your recommendation be?
My recommendation would actually be to pick up something. I mean, to be honest, I mean, I would probably go to the Call of Cthulhu starter set.
Okay.
Just because that, or one of the free quick starts.
Yeah.
Because Call of Cthulhu is a setting, it's set in the 1920s America. It's horror. Those two, like the setting and the genre, are really well known to people. You don't have to learn a lot about the history of the world, or long spell lists, or kind of understand different cultures. And usually, if you want just some sort of a straightforward, like, this is how to play.
Well, and something that you mentioned earlier that I had a pre-written question that I wanted to dive into. you were talking about, depending on the level of detail you want to go into with BRP, obviously it's very modular, even from a GM perspective. But I wanted to ask what your mindset was around what got more or less detail, we might say. So, for example, or maybe mechanical density, we might say. It seems like there's a lot of mechanics and detail and density around dealing harm. Is kind of the the way that I saw it, and maybe less so around things like social or exploration. Now, that's not to say that there isn't depth there, because I was shocked with the amount of depth, honestly. But just, kind of different levels, and to, bring it back to the dragon. I know that the dragon's breath weapon has a diameter of 3 meters, but I don't necessarily know, the amount of square miles it claims as its territory, or the level of affluence with which it will parlay with another creature, or the last example I had was the types of food that give it indigestion. Where was your mindset in that level of detail?
To be honest, that to me was the kind of stuff that a setting should cover, rather than just the basic role-playing version of it. Now, should, for example, we do a basic role-playing fantasy type game, we'll probably talk about those kinds of things and present more of that. But I think that the idea of like, how is this creature's place in the ecosystem is hard when you're trying to present it without an ecosystem.
I see.
The player, or the game master rather, he's supposed to take this, or she is supposed to take this thing, this little chunk of content that is a dragon, and integrate it into their world.
Sure.
And so that means not having to scratch out a bunch of stuff that's not relevant, but really having to sort of build their own framework for what are dragons in my setting.
So the real focus was on as much detail as possible on the things that will be the most commonly relevant in any given setting.
And things that are usually conflict related. I mean, that's generally where you want to put a lot of, like, basically what they say, where the tire hits the road.
Sure.
Like where there's a force coming against another force, in this case player characters versus a dragon. Like those two butting heads, how do you handle mechanically that interaction?
And I will say, to even I pre-caveated my own point, but I wanted to hear your mindset first of I find it very I find a very attractive thing about BRP to me is that because adversaries are using the same systems as the PCs, if you were to, say, develop a system like you have the opposing personality traits system later in the book, if you're utilizing that for your PCs, you could just as easily utilize it for the adversaries.
Right. And you can use those for opposed roles. Is the player's valorous? Like, am I going to sneak around and try to find this, this treasure item while I'm in a dragon's pile versus the dragon's greed? Those rolling those two stats to see, is the dragon going to pursue the end of the earth to get his little piece of treasure back? Its treasure back.
Yeah. What is one thing that you have wanted to talk about or you've wanted to speak on in terms of BRP that no one has ever asked you in an interview before?
Oh, that is an interesting question. I don't know. I'm pretty outspoken. Sometimes I think the marketing department would rather I not be as outspoken as I am. I think that like, to me, the ultimate expression of BRP has not probably happened yet. I think that the next edition, which believe me now, there's no plans on it. It's not on a drawing, anything like that. I'm not hinting at the next release, but I really can't wait for that. And I think that would probably be a lot more stripped down. I'd like to make BRP more basic. And it's funny because after the book came out, I think one of our the long-term employees, Dustin, who's been with the company almost longer than anyone.
Yeah.
He was saying, you have it in your head to maybe do an even more basic role playing. And I was like, we should call it that.
Yeah, just keep adding Bs onto each new edition.
Basicer, and some basicer. And then,
Basicist.
but no, I would like to see, ultimately in the future, to see a BRP that is in leaner and more streamlined.
Something
That's
closer to
generally
that
what
16-page booklet.
maybe a little longer than that to cover all the bases, but
Happy medium.
you know, like the work I'm doing with a few other products is mostly the brunt of the work is cutting rules,
Sure.
streamlining, simplifying, using congruent systems to handle multiple things. Things like how do we handle this? And I said, why don't we just take all of these like 5 different spot rule systems or subsystems and just put them all together into one simplified, most things that are doing X do it like this.
Yeah.
System.
I mean, and something related, or it seems at least in the same kind of mind space, is the fate points using PowerPoints. Using kind of these base layers.
Yeah.
For different
so that's what I think. The one thing that if I don't really talk about, but is something I'd like to do more of. I'm afraid that we didn't really have time based on some external forces to do that with the newest iteration of BRP. But I believe that whatever form it takes in the next generation, it will be a simpler version.
And I think the fundamental reason that BRP is able to go so basic, so streamlined, is that the math in BRP is just so intuitive. As Jason said, it's grounded in reality. A person can understand the odds at a glance of anything in the system. Now, I want to look at a system that focuses a little bit less on intuition in the math, but more so focuses on guidance and building intuition in the role play. Hello, Matt and AK. What is up,
Hello.
Pocket Dimension?
Howdy, Jack.
Very glad to have you. And we are going to talk about Daggerheart and the dragon that you guys made in it. And I'm very excited that I could get you guys specifically and Daggerheart more generally.
Okay.
Because adversaries are one of the biggest parts of that game that I'm most interested in.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. And you guys seem to have at least tied for some of the most just raw amount of experience in the system. Like playing it and presenting it. What have so far, just broadly, been your impressions of the system?
I think, who said this? I don't remember, and I've been saying it so long now that I don't even remember who said this. So I will give them credit somehow elsewhere. Around the same time, Daggerheart and DC-20 kind of became some contenders on the stage,
The new darlings,
and
if you will.
yes, the darlings, and we were lucky enough to get to play both of them in these early stages, and people immediately started asking us, what are the differences between, in your minds, DC-20 and Daggerheart, and we said that Daggerheart is a game written for and by theater people, and DC-20 is a game written for and by math nerds. Which is kind of, and it still has that vibe. It's I mean, the Critical Role game is going to be hardcore role playing first, right? Just out of the gate. There's so many amazing starts to this game that just kind of put you in the vibe.
It's more about the atmosphere and the tone than exact math working out.
There's less math.
Definitely
less math.
Matthew, by the way, that was one of our community members. Shout out to our Pocket Pals. That was Hecate who had said that in our Discord.
Hecate.
Cool.
Yes.
That pretty much immediately leads me into one of the things that I wanted to ask you about in terms of the math, I suppose.
The math.
I know that the dragon that you guys made is a tier 4 adversary, which anyone that's used to D&D is going to be thinking in terms of CR and levels, and there are still levels, like player levels in Daggerheart, but the adversaries are all just split up into 4 tiers of play.
Yep.
How have you found that in terms of like balancing encounters and like communicating challenge appropriately? Because it's almost kind of the inverse of D&D, where D&D has all of this granularity with the CRs versus the levels, and Daggerheart kind of takes that opposite. How have you guys found that?
Yeah, so with that, I will say that, you can follow the rules. Ugh, rules, so bad. And they are, each of the tiers is set, where it's like tier 1 is really for like levels 1 and 2. So our tier 4 adversary is, who is 4 levels 8 through 10, 10 being the top level in Daggerheart. But to exactly the point that you just made, I have had so much fun creating encounters and baddies in the system that don't have to match that level. Because I think, and I'm so glad we're already like not throwing shade at D&D, but talking about all the different ways we can think about these TTRPGs that don't box us in.
Yeah, it's the thing that people are going to be familiar with, and the point is to get them familiar with other things.
Familiar with other things. I think it was around the time that we first started playing with not Daggerheart. I think it was around the first time that we first started playing with Shadowdark. So many great games.
So many darks.
So many darks. So many daggers, so many hearts. And we have hearts and stars for them all. I think it was with Shadowdark. We played and realized that not every encounter is meant to be fought to the death. There is so much cool, role-playing within your party and within the world that can happen when you're not just there to beat up. When we're talking baddies, of course, like we want to bring them down, but like, how can we continue the story if they run or if you run? Like, what if the party is split and things like that? And you recognize out of the gate that you are mismatched. What role-playing moments can we have for that? And I think that's kind of the point of view that like Daggerheart hinges on for every decision that it's made in building this game is like, what role-playing moments, what party moments and encounters and kind of like letting the party discover things and dictate things rather than putting the onus solely on the game master is something I think that Daggerheart really excels at. And so the tier system for me really supports that notion.
It gives you a general area.
Exactly.
And the rest of the system means that maybe you don't need the granularity to make sure that everything is finely tuned. If things are a little bit scaled up or down, it still works because the rest of the system supports that.
Something cool's going to come out of it still. Yep.
And one of the systems that, to my eye, would support that, which we can maybe lead this into the dragon specifically, but it seems to be the motives and tactics. This is something that I can't think of any other system that I've seen that has this as like an explicit part of the adversary stat block. Normally it's like baked into the natural language portion, the flavor text. How have you found the motives and tactics? Because I can see it being something, that maybe gets like ignored or like left on the wayside, but then you sent me the stat block and I was like, oh, right there. It's every motive and tactic. Do you use it really often?
Listen, Matt already answered beautifully by saying that, Daggerheart is a system written for and by theater kids. I majored in drama. So this underlying, what's my motivation?
Who is my character?
Who is this character and what do they want? What is their core undying belief? Do I use it in every game? No. Obviously, we do a lot of like one-shot community games and things like that. And so I can't tell you that I get to the crux of every baddie's, motivation. But
skeleton.
Knowing... Yeah, they're a skeleton. They're going to stab you,
and angry. I mean,
Shambles.
So I find that stuff better for longer form campaign play, which I have played in a campaign. I don't remember what level we started at. It was somewhere around 3 or 4 up through level 10, and we were fighting hordes of dragons, which feels correct, up through like the biggest, baddest dragon of them all. And you really did. Each character, our GM in that one, shout out to Bladebound Saga. Daniel was the game master for that one, and he had such a way. Each dragon was fully different. It had a motivation, and gave these speeches before we fought and things like that. So it really does come out to play if you want it to, and that's the kind of table you're running.
Yeah.
Sick.
Yeah.
Well, and I guess without further ado, I'll edit in a visual of it somewhere. But let's talk about your dragon in particular. Nyxavorus.
Nyxavorus. Nyx for short.
Yeah.
Oh,
Make it easier.
She's kind of cute. Okay.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay. So tell me about Nyxavorus.
Perfect.
So when we first started thinking this up, we wanted a Stygian monster, kind of like something that could, and so this was great because it gave me some great lore that now I want to put into Daggerheart campaigns as we come into the full release of the game. But Matt and I wanted something that was a little woo woo and a lot kind of if to use the D&D term, psychic damage dealing. We wanted something that was going to kind of creep into your mind.
Little cosmic horror
Yeah.
lurking at the edges.
Yeah. Basically, we just wanted to build a mind fuck. That's the whole tweet right there. Is we wanted, breath weapons are cool and sexy and everything.
Yeah.
But
But what
we
if I
wanted
could breathe into your mind?
Yeah.
What about
Yeah.
that?
Ew, but yeah.
So for just the we'll go through the boring number things now. Being a tier 4 adversary, we put the difficulty at 20. So just like in D&D and other games you've played, you're going to have modifiers when you play. So you're going to roll your 2d12s together, you're going to add them up, and then you're going to apply any relevant modifiers, such as experiences, which is something I could do a whole video on. 20 is a hard number to hit if you're rolling 2d12 plus some things, but it's not impossible. And we wanted to make the monster hittable. If I'm doing just a straight attack, my modifier is a +9. So in Daggerheart, the GM still rolls a d20. We don't roll with Hope and Fear as the GM. So you roll your d20, I would be adding a +9. And then I gave her 2 attacks, one with her tail, because she's a dragon, so she can, but she's massive, she's huge, so she can... we also don't deal with distance the same in Daggerheart. So instead of in 5, 10, we have melee, very close, far. And so close can be anything between 10 and 30 feet away. And that kind of is, again, we get to play with each other rather than just sit there and be measure.
Right. It's much faster to communicate those types of things.
It is, yeah.
And there are damage thresholds in Daggerheart. So there's minor, major damage, and severe. For anything minor, you're going to mark 1 hit point. For anything major, you're going to mark 2 hit points. For anything severe, you're going to mark 3. So her severe thresholds are major is what starts her major starts at 30. So if the players roll damage anything 29 and below, she's going to mark 1 hit point. Anything between 30 and 59, she's going to mark 2 hit points, and 60 and above, she's going to mark 3.
And how do you? I wanted to ask you guys, both from the player and GM perspective. One of the more interesting things to me about Daggerheart were the combination of damage thresholds, HP, armor. It had a much, I would say, maybe wider view of defenses than something like D&D that just boils it all down to AC. How have you found that system? Because I remember when I was first looking at it, I had some people in the comments basically saying, a lot of this game is more abstracted, more simple, but this seems a little bit more complicated. Do you find that that's a how exactly do I say it? A value add to the experience of running the monster and running against the monster?
Matt,
I can speak as a player, because AK has done a lot more GMing Daggerheart, but I really like it. Again, it goes back to role playing, where you think of your character as, because that's always been something that's bothered me, is that in D&D, and trust me, we love 5e, we love We love all the flavors, so it's
we'll
not
give
that.
the big asterisk right now. We all love D&D.
Yeah.
We all love playing games together.
Now
Love
let's
it.
talk
We
about what's
love it.
wrong with it. Let's
Let's
go
do
on.
Well, players, everybody's just a bag of hit points. It's just a sack of walking hit points, and that there's
think
no.
the term "sack of hit points" I think has come up in every single interview. If that says
It's so
anything.
hot right now. It's so hot right now. Yeah, everybody.
Sacks
I mean,
of
it really.
hit points are so hot.
And it's so it doesn't give you any indication to it doesn't give you anything to play with when you've got I've got 30 and I've got to get down to 0. But when you start adding these different layers of damage and thresholds, and this is not the only game doing it now. At least DC-20 did for a while. I don't know if it still does. I haven't checked out version 9 yet, but it just feels more role play. Like, what does that mean mentally when you're hit so hard that like a piece of your life force goes away? And it's not just, is it a cut? Is it a psychic blast? Is it a star cloud of poison? I mean, this allows you to kind of tell that story a little bit better. I really, really like it. And
it almost like by categorizing it into these kind of smaller packages, I don't have to think about, okay, what's the difference between losing 17 health or 11 health? It's like, I don't what does that mean? If you only have 3, if it's 1, 2, or 3, that's like kind of a good almost guideline for you as the player of like, okay, I can kind of base my role play reactions off of that much easier. Is that sort of where you're going?
Yeah, exactly. And similarly with the armor evasion system. Again, it's kind of multi-layered in that way where you can think about a thief being very evasive.
Absolutely.
So they're going to have a very high number, but then a tank is going to put on some armor, and that's going to help as well. It just gives you a few more tools to play with mentally as well.
Yeah, and it's so it seems like all of the changes for you really kind of go towards that core that you guys mentioned at the beginning. It's for the theater kids. It maybe is a little bit more complicated with the math of like balancing things. But it gives so much value in that like theater side of things.
I would like to, much like we just asterisked D&D, Daggerheart is the ultimate don't judge it till you play it. Almost every single aspect of Daggerheart. That feels weird. That's strange. I mean, I remember when I first heard about it, I was like, initiative list? Like, what are you on? And then it's like, you're like, you have to balance like armor slots and stress and what? Like, I'm telling you, when you play it, it all makes, and like I mentioned, I was an English major. I hate math. Demiplane shout out makes it like they were ready for prime time even in the beta, right? Like you can press one button and say calculate damage, and it will tell you what to do. It will say burn an armor slot.
And in terms of immersion and what we've been talking about in terms of maybe mechanics light but not rules light, experiences. That's the next thing on the next stat block, and you said you could write a whole video about this. Maybe you will by the time this is out. I don't know. But this is something that is for both players and adversaries, and which, I mean, broadly, it seems like player stat blocks, or I guess stat sheets, I suppose, and adversaries are very similar. There's not a lot of difference between the two. But let's talk experiences. Because you said you thought they would be dumb. What's How are they?
It's definitely. I would say it's one of the most unique things about this game. I think it's one of the hardest things to wrap a new person's brain around. Really, if you can just ease into it and relax into it, it is so fun because it gives the player, in this age of role-playing games where you have forever DMs. I feel like Daggerheart, in a small way, is trying to kind of say, "Hey, we could blur the lines a little bit." You know, you can just think of a background or a job. So you could be baker, or you could be candlestick maker, or you can start to really get esoteric with it and say,
so Nick, this
you
is
know,
total eclipse of the heart. Very nice.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
Total eclipse of the heart for this dragon. And then you're kind of taking a leap of faith that you can then have a conversation with the GM at the right moment and say, this is what this experience means to me.
Yeah.
Are you okay with me, spending a hope and using this bonus to? Yeah. And it's just so fun.
Well, and something that I've played a game that has something sort of similar to experiences, but it's kind of the underlying mechanic of everything, which is a City of Mist.
Oh yeah, I want to play that. Yeah,
it's fun. It is experiences on steroids.
Wow. I'm in.
All of your features are essentially described through similar language to experiences.
Okay.
Cool.
Which, for the audience that don't know, it's this kind of this sort of vague,
flavoring.
Broad
it's the
flavoring that you can then apply to roles when you feel as though it applies. And something that I experienced in City of Mist, and I've heard about in other games that have experience-like features, is that there can be some amount of like haggling. But something that drew my eye about experiences in this is that they cost a hope. They cost a resource.
Right.
That could be used for other things.
Exactly.
Do you find that, have you experienced any amount of haggling? Because I feel like the kind of cost of it would kind of cut down on that.
I will say, as both a player and a GM of Daggerheart, as the thing that's been, getting most of my hyper focus for the last year, I have never been told no by a GM. I have had a GM say, like, tell me in story how you would use that, and like, again, as a role-playing moment, but I've never had them tell me no. And I, as a GM, players out there watching this, correct me if I don't think I've ever said no. Again, I might have said, like, I need you to justify that for me. How does that come out in this moment? And things like that. But I don't think that, and to exactly what you just said, that it costs a resource, you're going to burn a hope to use it. And that's one thing. I will say this as far as experiences go. I always include them on the adversary stats. I don't find myself using them as much. For me, it feels a little like, unless I have an experience that is like perfectly worded for this thing, and then I have the fear for it, I'll kind of make myself burn a resource in that same way. Yeah, I'll toss it in if it's gonna be like a funny storytelling moment. Yeah. But for some reason, for me, it almost feels like I'm taking something away from the players if I like, well, I'm gonna use my experience. Memory all alone in the moonlight.
It feels really nice as a player mechanic, but a little bit almost like dilutive on.
I could take or leave it as a baddie mechanic. I think personally.
Let me pitch something to you. This is a total guess. This is just like where my mind's going with it.
Yeah.
Do you think that you would find yourself using it more on recurring adversaries? Maybe an adversary that they're going to face more than once, because that does seem...
Like a Strahd.
Yeah, like a Strahd. Because that seems to me to be, like, when you talk about like, not wanting to take it away...
Yeah.
I think about this a lot, even as a D&D DM, of, like, not wanting to make my monsters take up too much space in the room because there's a new one all the time. Yeah. And I can see that with experience of like, oh, look at this cool experience that I wrote for this one, and you're going to see it once and never again.
Yeah.
Right.
Interestingly enough, so experiences are something that now, as we've all been talking about, when you first hear about it, it's like, okay, and coming out of the gate, it's hard. When you're building for a one-shot or when you're brand new, you kind of just have to lean into what you know about the character. This is why I tend to make almost all of my experiences song titles or lyrics. That's the way my brain thinks. You can see it reflected here with Memory and Total Eclipse of the Heart. I am nothing if not on brand. And it's fun for me. If that's not fun for you, please don't do it. But what has been really cool about being in Daggerheart campaigns is getting to, as you level up, you add experiences, and now I have something to base that experience on. And I love what you just said about recurring adversaries, because we're in this story together now. That's the whole part of Daggerheart that we love so much, again, is this dance between GM and players, and that we're like really collabing here.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, like if they're seeing me again, and you know, I last saw them at level 3, and now I'm going to see them at level 5, and I can name an experience after something we already experienced together. I'm so on board with this.
Speaking of, you know, mechanics, maybe light or features light, but not necessarily rules regular. Let's talk about the features.
Yeah.
Not only because you're, you know, essentially writing the, you know, you talked about the cards. And how everything is kind of this bespoke feature.
Yep.
Let's talk about Nyx's features and what it was like to write those as a as a GM, as a home brewer. You know, with D&D, there's a lot of, I would say, guidance on how to make new things like that. So I want to talk about your experience making these.
Yeah. So what we did is, you know, we came up with these motives and tactics, which again were unwrite reality, shatter hope, bend time, bury the truth in dreams. And then tried to let those influence each of Nyx's features. So kind of the first, you know, when you think about there's not a lot of guidance in the rules that we have so far. I'm curious for full release to see. So basically what I've been doing up till now is reskinning existing adversaries, and just to kind of make sure, like, okay, I'm not totally just, you know, off the deep end with, you know, the thresholds and things like that. So I tend to go for you know, if I'm doing like a tier 1, 2 adversary and Daggerheart, I'm probably going to give them maybe 2, maybe 3 features, and then I just kind of like step up from there. So we've given her 4 at level 4, felt right. So I'm always going to throw in a passive, the thing that they're just kind of doing at rest. That's the reason you don't want to face them. So her passive feature is called Rewrite the Stars, or whenever she takes a hit, radiant starlight erupts from her wounds. This is the whole part about like her blood, you know, damages this mortal coil. And creatures in close range, so that's up to thereabouts 30 feet, mark 1 stress. So, you know, first of all, you don't want to be that close to her, and you're probably not going to be. You're probably not going to be in her melee range. But even if you get a little too close, you're gonna feel that burn, and that's kind of like what we were talking about earlier. With you've got stress, you've got hit points, you've got armor, like So I'm finding all these ways. So it's like if I'm doing that passively at the very beginning of our dance together, and I'm stressing you out, if you max out your stress, you are now vulnerable, and all my attacks are now at advantage against you. And that's what I want as the one facing you down, is to get you into vulnerability as quickly as possible. So I want to take your hope. I want you to be fearful of me, and I want you stressed out.
And how do you
cutthroat, don't I?
Perfect for a dragon. It's perfect.
I love it.
And how do you find that sort of interplay between stress and hope? The main TTRPG I've played besides D&D is Blades in the Dark, which features stress heavily. It seems like Daggerheart has them, I don't want to say on an equal level, but they sort of seem to occupy similar places. And my first kind of impression was, you know, stress is going to be more environmental stuff, out of combat stuff. But now you have it on this dragon as they're taking hits and damage, presumably in combat. So how do you kind of feel, or for lack of a better term, vibe out, when you're using stress, when you're using HP? How do you balance that?
So one thing that's always been frustrating to me as a DM, a D&D DM, is the, like, let's just take dragons because it's Dragon Week.
It's Dragon Week.
The fear, the concept of dragon fear is, I have never been able to properly convey that, I feel like, because there's so many creatures that are, it's so hard, and like so many people are like elves or are not afraid, or sorry,
don't even get me into that.
But here you have a situation where you know, based on AK's benevolence, you can actively, if they get too close, they can feel that's like a visceral and a mechanical thing that you know, they can't really be immune to it. You could have ways to balance the stress, but you know, if she wants to give you a stress as a GM, then you're going to be stressed out. I like that.
It feels telling to me that you, when you went into D&D and into the dragon, that you locked in on the fear aura, right? This thing that it feels like should be present but shouldn't deal damage. You know,
Sure.
a dragon should be intimidating and scary, but psychic damage feels like a little much.
Yeah.
So
Right.
it feels like stress is a good route to go
Yeah.
down when you want this kind of feeling of pressing
Yes.
The wall
tension.
then.
Just low-grade stakes being raised.
Yeah, without actually
Yeah.
dealing psychic damage to them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you're going to think about your combat, especially at a boss level fight, in phases, right? It's not all going to, you kind of want the tension to build, you know, so it's like we're drawing you in, you got too close, you got stressed, you pushed out, you realize we have to now do a full court press. Now we're stressed, now we're vulnerable, like, and now we're trading volleys in a whole different way because we're in a new phase of this fight. We've come up with 2 other features. Matt, you want to talk about the next one?
Yeah, I
doing
can
all the
just kind of
talking.
run through them. The gravitational dissonance is another really cool little feature. Whenever a character marks a hit point, Nyx can alter gravity around them. Which again, remember that marking a hit point is not, you know, there are ways to even kind of reduce all damage so that you don't take any hit points. So it's a big deal when you take an actual hit point loss.
Yeah, because like
So-
you know, a tier 4 character, quote unquote, that would be fighting Nyx. How much HP are they having on average at this level? Or at this
Around 8,
stage?
like depending
Yeah,
on what
8
they
or
took at their
9, yeah.
level ups,
So-
you know, yeah.
A hit point is more
Valuable.
than 10% of their health.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you, and this might tend into something else I was going to ask you about, we'll see, environments and ranges
Yep.
and movement, no attacks of opportunity. Do you find people moving a lot? And are they moving for mechanical reasons or flavorful reasons? And it's like 2 ands. Are there specific mechanics that you can identify that are kind of driving those decisions?
Oh,
or is it like
1000%.
your personal map design?
As a player, and I just came out of I mentioned there's an actual play going up on Bladebound Saga's channel, and I play a guardian. I play a Fibbit guardian. That's a fairy ribbit, which I love the ability to just kind of like put things together that you want to. And so she's the tiny tank. She can fly. That's her fairy ancestry. Pop it in. And as the guardian, it is you are not a sack of hit points. You are a sack of armor slots that you can use to protect yourself and those around you. You have shitty evasion though. Like that's the trade-off, right? It's like everything's going to hit, but you're going to be able to negate a lot of it. So I moved around so much as this Fibbit because it was my job to protect the party, and I took that job very seriously. And it was we were playing mostly theater of the mind versus, you know, normally we do like some kind of VTT.
Yeah.
And I was constantly asking the GM of that one, how close am I? Can I fly over and put my body between, you know,
And,
way
and are
more.
your defensive abilities on the Guardian, they're referring to like, you know, you can protect someone in very close range or something like that. So it seems like
There's
the ranges are the big driver.
Exactly. There's a domain card called I Am Your Shield, where you have to mark a stress in order to be able to do it, but you can take all of that damage, but then you have something called Guardian's Hope, where you can spend hope in order to clear armor slots. So like, and that's the thing is you're constantly like doing all of these things. So I have never, but like to the point I think you're making, like the movement felt generated by like a deep need to play my character. Rather than just like a run away, or run into melee.
Right.
So it definitely felt more like, what's my motivation? I am the protector. I must, you know, stand between.
And another mechanic in combat that's such a big part of Daggerheart is the tag team concept, where 2 players say, I want a tag team.
Yeah.
Somebody has to spend 3 hope. And then both of them make attacks, and you get to choose
Which
what
roll?
the better attack is. So it's basically like it is advantage in D&D, which is very different in Daggerheart. So it is
But
like
it's almost
you
like
get
being
the
able
best.
to do 2 save or suck spells.
Right.
And like if either of them work, then you go with that one. Yeah.
And so not only do you get double the like, it's probably going to hit, right? But you also, so like, let's look at Nyx. She's a tier 4 adversary with 9 hit points, which coming from something like D&D sounds really low. So I talked about our, minor, major, severe thresholds. If you do double the severe amount of damage, you're going to mark 4 hit points. So that's almost half of Nyx's so if 2 of my players tag team, because what you're going to do is you're going to choose the role that you want. Now, I love when it becomes like a Sophie's Choice thing where somebody rolled higher with fear and someone else rolled lower. So it becomes the do we think a 16 is going to hit her? Or should we go with the 21 with fear? We're going to give our GM fear, but I don't think a 16 is going to hit her, right? So we play that. We have that dance first. And then the 2 players that rolled together add the total sum of their hits together. That's how we get those 4 HP dealing. So a couple of my favorite moments in game have been when I've tag teamed and one of us has crit. So our crit rules are you take the base damage and you add what you roll to it. So when you take base damage plus my roll plus what the other player rolled, you're at least severe, if not double. And that's how you bring these adversaries down to their knees, is that you get to actually role play together, do one big hit, and level half.
So you are moving. You are constantly positioning yourself and thinking about things. I think for some also, if anybody's really, really, really offended by metagaming, this game is a little harder for that sometimes, because there is, you have to just assume that the 2 players are such good friends and, but there is a little bit of a table talk about that, but it is so fun. When you can position yourself and do this, the whole, it's great.
It's just awesome.
Yeah, it's great.
And then we have one final feature left. Starlight Shroud, another Starlight special. So we have Starlight Spiral and Starlight Shroud, where Nyx becomes wreathed in a veil of shimmering starlight, making her difficult to pin down. So until she marks 1 hit point, I always want to give a what ends the condition, right? So this is until somebody hits her and does some damage to her. All ranged attacks against her are made with disadvantage. So this is what we were talking about before with the phases, right? Is I'm maybe trying to draw them into me to get them stressed. But then I also I'm packing a punch if they're going to level ranged attacks on me as well. So
this
maybe
seems, just as a compliment, this just seems like good design. This is this is a feature that could exist in D&D. This is just cool. That's a very cool way to get that more phasic experience. So
we're pushing them back. We're drawing them close. It really is. I know I've said this a million times, but it's a dance.
I think the big thing I took away from Pocket Dimension was how so many of the mechanics combine to evoke a really specific theme. The by and for theater kids sort of feel is pervasive, and it supports a specific type of play super well. So then I wanted to look at a system that also evokes a particular theme, but rather than something that is pretty familiar, but you might say fine-tuned towards a theme, like I would say Daggerheart is. The next one, the Beckoning Dream, takes the kind of core assumptions that a lot of us might have about TTRPGs and absolutely tosses them out the window. Well, Matt, welcome. Thank you for joining, for being a part of this. And let's just start off by describing the system that you are building the dragon in. And if I, from an outsider's perspective, I did a tiny bit of research in the playtest document that you sent me, and the way that I would, one sentence describe it from the outside is a deck building interpretive TTRPG.
Yeah, I love it. You've hit 2 of the biggest notes of it. It is deck building. This is I've got my tweetable, skeetable, my elevator pitch. The Beckoning Dream is a TTRPG for exploring questions of self, reality, justice, and power, where you traverse the Dreamlands with your deck of tarot cards, each evoking a narrative inspiration with some mechanical potency in order to battle demons both within and without. It is sort of the love child of everything I love about deck builders like MTG and Yu-Gi-Oh! And Pokemon, without having to purchase cardboard you don't already own. There's no chase. You just get tarot cards, right? And we love tarot cards. I love, ever since I read like the Art and Arcana, the book that goes into like the art history of D&D, the connection between art and tabletop role-playing games, I think is something that should be celebrated, not just in spirit, but mechanically too. So I wanted a game that featured artwork as part of the actual game mechanics of what you are playing with. So it is meant to take that tarot interpretive experience, what is this card telling me, and give it some mechanical card dueling kind of backup.
Yeah, the thing that really struck me almost immediately once I started reading is I had never thought about, and this might sound so basic, but I had never thought about when I play Magic the Gathering or when I play the board game Dominion, what is the deck? Like,
right?
What I never really thought about it before, but it's like in Magic the Gathering, it's like an army or, you know, a faction, you might say. And in, you know, something like Dominion, it's your dominion, your kingdom, your things that you have at your disposal. And the Beckoning Dream and like made me think of that question because it's suddenly like, oh, let's represent your essentially, you know, in terms of other TTRPGs, like class as this deck that you built. And I saw some of that, not just deck building, but deck dueling influences and how the foes are constructed. And this is going to be a video about the foes. So before I ask my question too much further, you want to describe your dragon? What does a dragon look like in the Beckoning Dream? Because it is kind of a primordial foe in a way.
Dragons have always been a hallmark of avarice and greed. They hoard things. It's all about what can they gain to the detriment of everyone else, or not even to the detriment willfully, but just they don't care. They don't care about whatever you got as so long as they have whatever they can sit on their big pile of nest. So the like when it gets into like the foe, the description of what this enemy is, it doesn't even say it's a dragon. It says it's avarice. These are beings of pure greed and desire. And the size of the dragons, I think I come from like a D&D background. I come from a trad gaming background. And that it's always fun to see like, oh, the little wormling. And then later in levels, it's like the giant mega smaug like descending upon things and burning Lake Town, right? Like that progression. And I like the idea that like greed can be at different levels. So the dragon that's presented in this game has 4 different deck lists. They are all the same basic cards, but of different values. So you have like a hatched wormling that could represent an attention-starved rival or an unsharing sibling in your real life. You've got the growing drake that is a cutthroat entrepreneur or a jealous lover. Someone that's like, yes, they're having greed. It could be a little bit more self-justified, but like it's more toxic. It's starting to bend over that realm of like what is acceptable. Then we have the hoarding worm, a landlord or a company owner or some sort of like just a corporation personified. Like a dragon could be literally named Nike in your dream, and you're like, I don't like that shoe company. Like, and then there is the one that I'll talk about with direct mechanics is sort of the top level, the all-consuming avarice, the idea of greed itself, an insatiable concept. And this one I wanted to go all out because I think dragons are like a great sort of high fantasy watermark. People love fighting a dragon and it should feel epic. So I wanted it to feel epic in the mechanics. So it uses some of the best cards in the game. Each suit of the minor arcana, if you're not familiar with tarot, there's the major arcana, which is like death, empress, the high priestess, like those really named cool cards.
If you've watched JoJo's Part 3, that's you know them.
And then there's the minor arcana, which are basically 1 through 14, like a typical deck would be like ace through king. This very similar. It's ace through king, but there's an extra card called the page. There's more cards, and each suit has a sort of interpretation. Think like fate the fate system where it's like you have approaches that you want to use, or specifically fate accelerated, or like powered by the apocalypse games like Thirsty Sword Lesbians or Monster of the Week, where it's like your stats are like, how are you doing a thing?
Right.
Very similar in this game, where like swords is about being direct and forceful. Pentacles is about having a plan and using subterfuge and cunning. Cups is about being observant. And I thought those were the three that really epitomized what a dragon is. So they have the 10 through King of Swords, 10 page Knight, Queen, and King. So the best cards of the swords, they are giant beasts that want to do what they want to do. They are forceful. They will impose their will on you forcibly. And that's a very swords thing to do. They have the 8 and 9 of Cups. Cups are about being observant. They're watchful of their horde. They want to understand, why are you here? Do I need to worry about you? But they don't have the 10 of Cups or higher, because if you don't know a lot about tarot, once you hit the 10, you've sort of completed the metaphysical journey of what that suit is telling you to do. And cups are about being very introspective and looking within the self for value. Dragons don't do that. They have the horde for value. They don't have value within the self. It's about what they can have that gives them value. So they don't have the 10. They can't get there. They don't fathom that sort of introspective world. Yeah. But they do have Knight, Queen, and King of Pentacles, because they absolutely have a plan, and they will lie, they will cheat, they will do whatever they can to get what they want. And they also have 2 major arcana to represent some particular aspects and also give them some extra abilities to give them a little bit of juice in a fight. There's the Chariot and there is the Devil. The Devil is about selfish temptation, and there's nothing more selfish than greed. Yeah. And then the Chariot is about you barrel over things. You continue moving no matter what. There's nothing that impedes your progress.
Yeah, it's momentum personified.
Exactly. So these cards represent sort of dueling abilities that could work in concert. And what do dragons fight with? Yes, it's teeth and claws and tail and wing, but breath weapon, right? Like you get. So the Devil represents inhale. The inhale ability, whenever they use the Devil against an opponent, they, in addition to doing all the normal things that the cards do, they get to steal all of the Onerigen from their opponent. And Onerigen are a special currency in the game that lets you modify things, change things. Think hero points in D&D or inspiration, those things that let you modify the game to benefit you. You earn those throughout play by acknowledging the artwork or the divinatory meaning of cards. The dragon can just and steal those from you.
And to be clear on that ability, that is an ability that is bespoke to the dragon. It is inspired by the Devil, but it is not just if you give the Devil Major Arcana to any, adversary, right, they are not going to be able to do the exact same thing.
Exactly. When you use for the system, whenever it uses Major Arcana for a foe, it's not using the same kind of abilities that a Dreamer would get using the Major Arcana, which you can. Those are one of those things that you can add to your deck as you progress, is Major Arcana, and they come with abilities that are tailored towards being PC abilities. These, whenever a foe has a Major Arcana, it's something unique. It is bespoke. It is speaking to the aspect of that card through the lens of what this foe is. And a dragon is going to bring everything into itself. It's going to inhale that ability to control the dream. And then when it plays the Chariot, it gets to exhale. And the dragon can spend any number of Onerigen it has racked up through regular play or through its use of the Devil card to then make everyone experience some sort of effect. So in the game, typically it's card dueling. If you've ever played Fury of Dracula, the board game, it's very similar to that, where it's just one person v one person, and you resolve what those cards do, and then you move on to the next person. Any abilities that can hit other people that aren't in that direct opposition can be very, very powerful, because when it gets around to that other person's turn, they've already taken damage. They might not have any cards left in their present to be able to use. And so now they're much weaker against that matchup. So the dragon, the whole idea of like this breath weapon being this area of effect, it's hitting everyone. No one can escape its wrath. All of the dragon's abilities are focused on, I'm going to make all of you feel pain. You are all going to feel my wrath for trying to touch my things. So its exhale ability with the Chariot, it can spend any number of those Onerigens to inflict some sort of ability. It can either inflict 1 stress per Onerigen spent. Stress is like damage, but this game tries to abstract away what a duel looks like. So like, we could be having a sword fight, or we could be having a cooking contest, or we could be having a debate. All of those things are still represented by dueling with cards, but you're using the same mechanics to represent different narratives. So it uses stress instead of damage, just in terms of the verbiage of the game.
Well, especially because it's within the dream. So even in a sword fight, you're not literally bleeding out. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just the stress of how soon are you going to wake up as this vivid imagery and this feeling hits you as you are dreaming. So for every Onerigen spent, it can deal a stress, or for every 3 Onerigen spent, it can force you to burn a card. And when you burn a card, it goes away. It is gone. You don't get it for the rest of that session.
Yeah.
When you run out of cards, you wake up. You are out. You're gone. You are player eliminated for that session. So like your cards are both the things you can do, and they are your hit points. As you run out of them, you are more likely to wake up and be out of the dream and be unable to help. And then the last one is if for every 5 Onerigen spent, it can force everyone to blind burn, which is instead of getting to pick the card that you burn, it's just whatever the top card of your future is, gone. You don't get a choice. Oh, it was your best card? Too bad, so sad.
Well, and there's something really interesting because one of the questions that I had written down for you that I kind of, even throughout just our discussion right now, I'm realizing is not necessarily a non sequitur, but just sort of doesn't apply. I'm coming from a background largely of doing a lot of homebrew 5th edition, where we're really caring about our characters, really worried about if they're dying. I'm really concerned with providing appropriate challenge where I foreshadow things well, while, still having death as a risk. And so one of my questions that I had is, how are you designing these foes? Like, what sort of guidance is there to make sure that it's not too much of a blow-up challenge? And as I kind of looked at that question that I was about to ask as you were answering, I was like, well, I mean, you just wake up. Like, death is in that sort of time loop style almost. Death is not the end. At worst, you're out for that session, but you're right back in the next session. So it's almost gives you a little bit of freedom as a GM when you're designing these foes to where, maybe you misbalance something slightly here or there, and maybe that has a slightly unsatisfying end to one session, but it's not going to wreck the game for sessions to come. Would you say that that's all an accurate read? Yeah.
Absolutely. And I in the full rules, it breaks down a lot of like the guidelines of how do you make a foe? What should you be doing? Like, try not to go 3 values higher than the highest card a dreamer has.
Oh, so you do have like that sort of like strict guidance. That's nice.
It's not strict, but not to dunk on 5e, but I think we all have a really good understanding of what that game provides, and I don't want to dunk on it because I do love 5e. I still love 5th edition. It's a fantastic game for what it's doing. One of the things that I think is a very worthwhile critique is that the GM guidance and how you make monsters and exactly what CR means are very worthwhile critiques to be made about that game. I've read the DMG. I love the DMG. It's been very useful. It has weaknesses. It doesn't really tell you all of the implications, like when you do this, this is going to happen. When you do this, this is going to happen. Like, it doesn't say all that. So one of the things I wanted to emphasize when making this game was a lot of GM guidance. Over half the book is just GMs, how do you run this game? How do you make your own content for it? And giving you sort of like, if you asked me to teach a masterclass of how to homebrew this game, I tried to put that on paper for you so that it's like, these are good general rules of thumb, with the caveat that you should absolutely break them and have that dramatic, like, oh yeah, the first level of Final Fantasy, whatever number, is a boss battle that you lose. You get raffle stomped. A Demon's Souls does it, right? It kicks your ass with that first demon, and then you have to restart the level and you learn how to play the game and then you go beat it. That's kind of some of the experience you're meant to be tapping in here, is that you will face things you're probably not ready for. Most foes are going to have better decks than you do. The way that you can always win a duel by eliminating all these cards. So everything in the game is, when I said about stress is always handled by doing different things. So if I had 4 cards in my present, normally hand, but everything's diegetic. You've got your future, your past, and your present. If I took 3 stress, I could deal with that by discarding 3 cards. 1, 2, 3, and that deals with 3 stress. If I took stress, I could discard those 3 cards and then burn this last one to absorb 3 more stress. So I could pitch it away to the pyre and it's now gone forever. But now I don't have 12 cards, I have 11, right? So
Right.
now I'm that much closer to waking up. Everything in the game is pushing you towards running out of cards. Even discarding, because those are in my past. I now draw up a new present. I draw 4 cards. I take another turn. I keep playing.
Yeah.
As soon as I run out, if we're all familiar with like Magic the Gathering as a touchstone,
Sure.
as soon as I run out, once you deck yourself, you don't lose, but now you take all of the cards in your past, you shuffle those up to make a new future, and you blind burn the top one. So I don't get to choose what happens here. That one's gone. Now I keep playing, but I've got one fewer card.
Yeah.
Everything, even just something discarding, it's getting you through your deck faster. It's moving you towards running out of cards, and that will end a duel. If an opponent runs out of cards, they're out.
Last thing I think is a cool aspect of this that I wanted to highlight right before we go, because I've taken up a good chunk of your day.
You're not taking it up. I'm enjoying this. I love talking about this game.
Good. The art aspect of it. I was just talking on stream the other day with someone, and we were going kind of between gridded versus theater of the mind, and they made kind of a very final point of like, well, you know, everything else about theater of the mind being said, I can't use minis in theater of the mind, and I love my minis. I want to paint them. I like the artisticness of a mini, and the artisticness of the artistry, I guess I should say, of the tarot deck is very cool to me. That you can, because so many people love that in D&D. They want to get dice that represent their character. They want to paint their mini, and the tarot seems to, as long as you can, get the backs all neutral. The tarot deck seems to be a amazing way of approaching that sort of representation with the physical things that we're using to play the game.
Yeah,
So I don't know. I guess just a compliment.
I've got my shelf of tarot decks over here, so that like I can build, like when I'm prepping a session, I'll have my okay, this is my neutral GM deck that I'll use for like making the dream spread and just like random cards that I might need. But I'm gonna build like this foes deck out of like this. I've got this deck that is horror tarot. It's based off of like pulp comics and like movie posters and stuff. So it's meant to be, if I want something that's a little bit spooky, a little bit grungy, grimy, if I want something that feels very divine and oracular and mystical, I might use my divine tarot that goes through all these different myths from around the world and all these different pantheons to represent the cards. So one of the things I want to emphasize in this game is the artwork. And so there's mechanics that emphasize, like, at the beginning of a session, let's actually just do a fun little example. I'm going to pull a random card for you, and I'm going to ask a question.
Okay.
And we'll just imagine you're playing. We're at the top of a game, and you get the Queen of Coins. And I'll show you this. This is, by the way, I love this deck so much. This is the Eldritch Overload from Weirdworks. It is a like fantasy meets cyberpunk, and all of this.
Cool.
The foiling on the cards is all so fun. But using this card, what I would like you to answer is, who is someone that matters to your dreamer?
Using the Queen of Coins?
Mm-hmm. So using the artwork in this card, who is someone that matters to your dreamer?
Yeah, I'd say, and actually, this is maybe a good. Oh no! Wait, I don't want to do too much clarification. I want to go with my gut. I mean, my gut instinct was the person who signs my paycheck, because they.
And here we see in this card, we've got this person bringing a chest with a coin coming out of it, right? It's this offering of money. The person who signs your paycheck is important to you. You care about them. So that, what we would say is, we would boil that down to, what would that be visually to you? Would that be a person, like a coin offered, or wealth in hand?
Yeah.
What would that look? What's a good like 3-word like visual to go with that answer?
I would say a 3-word answer. I mean, the joke answer is dollar bills. But the real answer is probably like money in account or something like that. It's like it's money I can use.
Ooh,
yeah.
Money I can use. So I love that. Let's stick with that. Money I can use. And then later on in the game, we're playing cards. King of Coins comes up. Ooh, that is a bit of coin in that guy's hand. That is money you can use. You can invoke your guide to bolster this card, make its value higher. You can weaken this card, make its value lower, or you can burn cards out of your hand to give someone that's opposed to this card more advantages or ways of playing. So the whole idea of this game is that at the start, you create these guides that are visual, and then you look for them on everyone's cards, not just your own. And whenever that guide shows up, that's your subconscious of the dream guiding your character towards some goal, and you're following that destined path. And it's like, that artwork speaks to me. Then my guide is in that. I want to mechanically impact it so and so in such a way.
That's very.
And you can use those onerigens to like crank that up. So it's like normally it's like, I invoke my guide. I'll increase it by 1. Oh, but I've got 3 onerigen. I'll spend all 3 of those. I've increased it by 4. So that 3 of swords that might have been losing to like a 5 of wands, it's now a 7 of swords against the 5 of wands, and you've turned a setback into a success. So those are kinds of some of the ways that teamwork happens through artwork.
I can look at your dragon and it's got, devil, it's got chariot, and it has these really high swords, and it has, I think it was pentacles.
Yes.
And I can look at that and I can say, okay, I like just the general vibe. I like the general setups. I love the inhale, exhale, but I want to run it against some lower level dreamers, and I still want it to like feel good. So I just kind of take all the values and just go.
Yep.
And I don't have to worry too much about like something, to compare to D&D 5e. I don't have to worry about multi-attack. I don't have to worry about rebalancing layer actions. I don't have to worry about how AC and health combine to make an overall defensive feel.
Yeah, you don't have to calculate the defensive CR and the offensive CR and average. You're not having to do a lot of that. Like, I love that behind the screen math. Sure. And like, one of my pastimes on social media is be like, CR is busted because of this creature. And then I will just on a unedited TikTok, I will just go like, I'm going to calculate the offensive CR and the defensive CR. Right. Oh, look, it's what the book says. Like, it's there. You might not like it, but it's there. But like for the example, what you just said with the dragon, the reason I gave 4 different levels of dragon is that like it has a deck list and like all the abilities for the top one, and then all that it says under hatched wormling, it just says subtract 6 from the value of all cards in all consuming avarice, no chariot or devil. So a hatchling doesn't have those big major arcana that are going to be punchy, and it has 6 less value on all of its other cards. So you're still fighting a 10-deck dragon that can do pretty decent things, but against a bunch of lower level dreamers, it's not going to be as dangerous. They'll probably be able to beat it pretty handedly.
And that's a very, I've used some tools that, will adjust CR for you, and they try their best. But this seems... for me as a GM that loves to steal, I love to take someone's idea and modify it to my own table for my table to enjoy. And that is not always the easiest thing. It's not always the easiest thing to take someone's really cool idea and modify it down or modify it up because so much of those concepts are kind of hard locked to certain level ranges, and if you take it too low or too high, they just kind of don't work anymore. I especially really loved how specifically introspective the Beckoning Dream was. The mechanics were focused around the character's journey and their growth throughout play. The next TTRPG also focuses on the journey, but rather than growth, it more highlights their slow decay. Well, thank you for being here, Diana, and for talking to us about Memento Mori and its dragon. I'm kind of a weenie. I've not done a lot of horror stuff. And
oh man, you're in for a ride then. This is going to be so much fun.
I didn't even know that you were such like a horror sort of aligned GM before
Yeah,
this.
looks are deceiving. I get that all the time where people are like, really? You like cults and like Memento Mori and stuff like that? And I'm like, yeah, I honestly prefer it to like normal D&D. Like, I'll take Curse of Strahd and make it way more messed up if I have the chance. with the lore
Dive through
module.
all of the Ravenloft lore from back in the day. Speaking of fucked up, let's talk about the dragon, because I was first surprised that it even had like an entry for a dragon in the bestiarium, but then I read the dragon's entry, and it's if you're picturing a D&D dragon, that's not even close.
No, yeah. So take a D&D dragon, scale it up to like the size of a small city at like its smallest scale, and a mountain range at its potential largest. This dragon is, by the way, dragon singular. This game only has one, and it's like their closest thing to a god. If you go through the bestiary, it's like a singular like force of nature. This man.
Well,
It's
in Memento
interesting.
Mori, it's like most of the beasts, most of the adversaries have HP. They have like a difficulty class and then a special ability.
Yeah.
The dragon sort of has those things.
Sort of, in that the HP and difficulty class is just a bunch of question marks. Like, it doesn't even bother trying to put this thing into a stat block. Instead, there's just a couple sentences at the bottom of its picture that just says, hey, this is the closest thing we have to a god. Your players will not fight it, and they probably won't encounter it. And then it goes on to, a normal bestiary entry in this game. It has like 3 different sections. It has I believe it's like the appearance of the creature, any stories, so like the lore related to the creature, and then dangers, so like what you would need to do to combat it. At the very end, there's like a little section on ingredients and loot that you can pick up from it. The dragon doesn't have any of that. All it has is the stories. And it goes on to describe the author, like in a first-person sense, the author's single encounter with this thing, where you had to walk to the edge of the world, drink a specific potion, and just wait, and you would pass out and encounter functionally a god that was almost eldritch-like,
Yeah, that's so sick. You mentioned it to me when we were first talking about this, of it's much more kind of classically Arthurian than the much more, you might say, digestible ancient red dragon or ancient white dragon from D&D, which was super very, very interesting to me, and immediately just made me think of, like you said, almost like Lovecraftian Cthulhu. I don't know if you do it often. I feel like probably more often in a horror type setting, running these sort of incomprehensible threats that are more akin to like forces of nature than a real, digestible adversary with a stat block and all that.
Yeah.
How do you run those? And how do you kind of delineate a threat like that has like a consciousness and a will, as opposed to like something like a flood or an earthquake?
I try and make it have a lasting impact on the characters in a deep psychological sense, where I make it apparent from the beginning that they cannot fight it, and if they try, they will lose. And so the way Memento Mori works, like as written, the dragon is exactly that. It's like basically a force of nature. You're not supposed to encounter it. You're not supposed to fight it. I feel like it'd be a little bit more interesting if a GM were to take it in a slightly more impactful kind of direction where the players actually get something out of it. So in my games of Memento Mori, in theory, because I can never get anyone to play this game with me, I make it so that the dragon is something that you see right before you die. It's almost like an alternate version of the Grim Reaper, right? Where you come across it, or it approaches you if you've caught its attention and are sufficiently corrupted. The game is all about, if you haven't heard of it before, being corrupted by the Black Plague and trying to accomplish something before you die. You have one goal. It could be trying to find a cure for your infant son back home. It could be trying to find a long-lost artifact of your family, things like that.
And you will die playing Memento Mori. There's no retirement for these characters. Just playing the game, it's not a direct equivalent, but essentially reduces your max HP constantly.
You just snowball into death. It's wild. And the more corrupted you get by this disease, the more like you unlock these dark powers and things like that. Because it's still got fantasy aspects to it, obviously, because there's a dragon. And so the way I run the dragon is, if you go along in your journey and you're facing down death, and you've kind of reached a point in your character development where you have a lot of corruption and you've gotten so close to your dream, but you're about to be on the brink of death, the dragon shows up to you. As opposed to the normal Grim Reaper, the normal death mechanics, instead, this guy shows up. He appears out of the sky. The sky begins to like warp around him. His, membranes of his wings are made of just the same inky darkness that starts to spread across your own body with the plague. And it's got these.
Hear the horror GM even just in this.
Sorry, yeah, no, like
no,
I can't
it's
turn it off.
sweet. It's really cool.
And so it appears out of the sky to you, and only you. No one else in your party can see it. And it offers you a choice where you can go with it as opposed to just, you're not quite on the brink of death. Like, you could go a little bit further and you could test your luck in trying to accomplish your dream, but you're like gonna die within the next month or so, and
essentially, like, if you were to give up the ghost, you would probably pass, but you could muscle through it.
Yeah. And so the dragon says, hey, in incomprehensible eldritch language, you can come with me instead. I'll take your soul, and in exchange, I will give you a glimpse of what life could have been like if you accomplish your dream. You almost get a cutscene of what things could have been, and you get to get that satisfaction and see how the world would have turned out. But in exchange, you disappear. Memento Mori has this system where you have your name and then you have an epithet, whatever the term is, kind of like a title, right? And that is your impact on the world. It could be your vocation, it could be your history, things like that. If you take the dragon's deal, you lose your name and you lose any impact that you had on the world. You become a John Doe, almost like the same way that a false Hydra works in D&D. Any memory of you is erased, and there's a corpse left behind, but someone might just come across it and bury it in an unmarked grave somewhere. So you get...
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
it's
fascinating. From like, you mentioned the psychological impact part of it, and it's, at least, from my brief reading of Memento Mori, the whole thing seems so personal. It's very much your personal journey, your personal goals, and you're with others, but you're all kind of collectively striving for your own personal stuff. And so the idea of at the very end, you essentially give up everything you've ever done, but get to see what you could have accomplished. That's a gut-wrenching choice.
It is, especially when it harkens back to the concept of, Memento Mori translating to remember mortality, remember you must die. It's not just you dying in this instance, it's your legacy dying as well, if you make this choice. But on the other hand, if you reject the dragon's offer, it walks away. It leaves you alone. You can continue to make your last-ditch effort at achieving your dream or die trying. And instead, you gain canonically, this is part of the story that's in the bestiary, a 5-pointed scar on your chest or somewhere on your body that always glows this bright black color. And people will start to notice it. They'll know that you've had a run-in with the dragon. Some weird cultists out there will know what it means. And you can use that to kind of change your life path from there on out. But at the same time, when you create a character in this game, you have 3 bonds that you start with. It could be, a prized stuffed animal that you had back home and what it taught you about life, or maybe a memory that you had. You have the choice in this moment to change out one of your 3 bonds for a bond that you create related to the dragon. So this encounter with the dragon has changed you fundamentally, and even though you don't have that long to live, it might alter the course of what you do with your last couple months.
Interesting. Like a twisted, warped fairy godmother.
Kinda, yeah.
Giving you this last impact. That's so interesting. Well, and this sort of goes into, I have a feeling your answer is going to be at least in the same vein as my first question. But I wanted to ask you about systems where where the characters progressively sort of degrade. Because it's very different from the power fantasy level 1 to 20 that we see in something like D&D. And I've heard you talk about, I have a few written down because I didn't know most of them, Dreads, Permadeath, Morkborg, and Heretics, very metal characters. Cult, everything about cults.
Everything about it, yeah.
Insane.
Wild game.
Number one, what attracts you about those sorts of things? Because it seems like you're very into them and likely have some reasoning for that. And how would you recommend someone sort of change their mindset when they either go into GMing or DMing, GMing or playing something like Dread or Memento Mori that has this slow degradation of character?
I mean, on a personal level, I've always been a huge fan of horror tabletop games because fun fact, cannot do horror like video games or movies. When I was a kid, and to this day, I cannot stand being jump scared or like having to really witness all the scary parts of things like that.
You don't like being
terrifying
in
media.
sort of the roller coaster seat where you have no control over the scare?
Absolutely not. So I read the scripts of horror movies instead, and for horror games, I'll go through and like devour the Wikipedia or whatever. And so that way I kind of get the essence of what the horror is and what the scary parts are, but in a written format, which translates really well to the kind of like theater of the mind in tabletop games. So that's why I personally do it, but it also has a lot of value when it comes to, especially for games like the one you mentioned, like Dread, and other ones like 10 Candles, where you know you're going to die by the end. Makes for really good one-shots, and the games themselves tend to be really simple, so they work great as party games to get people kind of like to dip their toes into horror tabletops a bit. And also, knowing that you're going to die lends itself so much more to the roleplay aspects of the game. Like, you can make... I was just talking to someone about this earlier today in a different interview with Shelley Von Miller. She called it big swings only, where it's like, you're gonna die. Let's make it fun.
But you mentioned it kind of snowballs, and that's because the corruption sort of feeds back into itself through just like the way that the core ability checks work.
The way the game works is when you get more and more corrupted, then certain dice in your dice pool, which are D6s, it's a D6-based game, basically they become corrupted as well. And when you roll corrupted dice and you roll a 6 on them, then you gain another point of corruption in some stat or another. And so it really does have a tendency to snowball.
I mean, it seems like the broad system is meant to scare and intimidate and inspire fear. And as a horror-focused GM, I'm sure you have a lot of experience scaring your players. Do you?
I try.
How? I guess it's very basic, but how? I've run Strahd, and my players would not stop making Dracula jokes at the fanged
100%.
fucker. Like, they could not take it seriously for a second. So how do
I
you
think Strahd is
present
just like that, honestly. It's very goofy.
Yeah, a bit. How do you I guess instill that seriousness when they go to meet the closest thing that there is to the god in this universe? What are your kind of, I guess, heuristics or strategies towards slowing them down and making them take it serious?
I think the two major ones are the physical description of the creature that I'm working with, and usually not so much with the dragon because it's very much like a cosmic Lovecraftian entity, but for things like Curse of Strahd, I would rework all of my D&D monsters that my characters fight to be more gory. You know, they have limbs sticking out in places where they shouldn't. Their smiles go too wide and are a little bit too toothy.
Yeah.
I lean on body horror quite a bit, but
Body
the
horror
other
is
easy thing to
terrifying,
do-
dude. Just viscerally.
Oh, it's so great. It's so fun. I love it so much. My consent sheets are so long. But the other thing is to just straight up tell the players what they're feeling, or the party members what they're feeling. So you can say how a certain character looks upon this dragon and they suddenly feel every emotion at once cycling through them rapidly. They can start to hear screams of souls trapped inside the creature's scales. They can hear, you know, the cries of their mother as they were being born, things like that, where it's like just calling back to basically telling them what they experienced to help them get into the mood.
Oh my gosh. Not just the cries of their mother, but while they're being born is... I felt it.
It makes you think about your life cycle a little bit. Yeah, right?
Yeah, I was taking that serious the moment you said it. That's why I can even just, again, I'm a weenie. I'm a high fantasy and or like heisty Ocean's 11 type DM. Ooh. I can feel the experience gap here in describing horrifying things.
It's fine. On the flip side, I could never do a heist, dude. Oh my gosh. It's like heists or high political campaigns. I don't go near them. Ugh.
My favorite system is Blades in the Dark. I like...
Oh, of course it is. Of course it is.
Political's a bit of my shit. But that's why I'm so interested. And half of why I'm doing this whole project is to get more experience and really dig into what people really love about these systems. And I heard it even in the way that you're changing the dragon. It seems like these games, and possibly, correct me if I'm wrong, but possibly horror in general is just deeply personal. Like it hits at these personal aspects, and it helps you and possibly your players be very self-reflective.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's kind of what tabletops do in general, right? Is it puts you in a scenario that you would never encounter in real life, which is why it's so good for positive mental health. You can, I hear stories about trans folk who will roleplay as a character who doesn't match their physical gender in order to get a sense for how playing out a trans lifestyle, being their actual gender in real life could be, and it helps them kind of ease themselves into that psychological sort of sense. In the same way, in some of my D&D campaigns and other tabletop games, part of my consent sheet is asking characters what they do fear in real life that they are okay with having handled in a game, to kind of help them not like confront their fear in an exposure therapy sort of way, because I don't have those credentials, but something that kind of like pulls on those strings a little bit and enhances the experience.
Yeah, I think that may be the closest I've ever come to running like real horror in TTRPGs, is asking, I've done my like one greatest fear type of thing, but I did not relate it to their real life, which is very juicy. The process of that degradation interests me so much, because most of my experience is in 5e, where our players' characters are sweet little cherubs that we're trying to protect and foreshadow the danger so they don't get in over their heads. And with that, how do you handle that sort of accelerating degradation? Whether it's Memento Mori, it sounds like, and again, always correct me if I'm wrong, it sounds like you will give them that kind of last guardian that isn't going to stop them from dying, but it might give them a piece of what they're looking for. Is that like a common sort of strategy?
Can't say I've heard it be used before necessarily. I know some games have a mechanic where, and this is mostly a video game thing, right? Where if you die in the game, you can choose to just kind of go back to a previous save point. I feel like it's kind of derived from that in a sort of sense, that same sort of like, we'll give you a second chance, but like, in this game, not really. Like, it's a ghost of a second chance. It's a possible feature, a glimpse. I think in horror games, when it comes to like the degradation overall and how that's portrayed, it tends to, the way I do it on more of a micro level, I would say is more important to kind of hone in for the player or make the player feel their slow, spiral into corruption. So for example, the same things that they tried to do earlier in the game, if they make the same attacks, use the same weapons, I describe it as being a little bit harder as they go along. Or if they get wounded in a certain spot and early on in the game it healed within a day, I might describe how later on it heals more slowly. And this is just flavor, it starts to like boil at the edges of the wound instead and turn black instead of healing. So it's a lot of flavor wise things like that.
Yeah, and a real focus sounds like on callbacks. You showing the degradation through calling back to a better time. Back when these things weren't so hard.
Oh, 100%. Because in D&D I do the opposite, where you're getting more and more powerful as you go along. So in D&D I will throw an encounter at the party who's now level 12 that they fought when they were level 2, some pack of goblins.
Like an ant stomp that they can feel real
Exactly.
cool. Yeah.
And I think those are important for scale and for perspective to let them feel, see how far they've gone.
Yeah. And so the horror games are almost the inverse of that.
Exactly.
They fought maybe a small version of this, but it either has gotten stronger or, more realistically, they've gotten weaker. We talked a little bit about the plague and the snowballing degradation. Is there anything else about Memento Mori that really attracts you? Is it, the monsters? Is there any particular mechanic? Because the monster entries are very cool and evocative to me as someone who's a bit of a monster manual hater. Those are super neat to me, but what is it about Memento Mori for you?
Honestly, I was nabbed by the art instantly. I heard about it initially because my stream audience told me about it a long time ago. It was that and Apocalypse, because I was talking about my love of like horrifying and more intense and more mature tabletop games. And like the art in this game just really evokes, I can kind of hold it up to the camera, and it just really evokes the sort of like old school, like almost biblical sketches that you'd see, except it's all horrifying creatures, people being pulled apart or their flesh just kind of slawing off. It's that sort of stuff that I like to try and describe in my games. And so having it be just kind of like in picture form, I'm like, oh, this should be on my shelf. Like, this is for me. This is my thing.
Feel an immediate kinship there with the sloughing off of skin. Yeah. That's it.
Oh, yeah.
That's
100%.
That's sick. You mentioned how the dragon is described from this like first person authorial perspective, which I know I've said it a lot, seems like it's leading into the personal aspect of all of this. Is that a consistent theme throughout the book of just like this very personal descriptors?
I believe so. I still have to get into like what the actual modules for this game look like, but as far as the bestiary and the like general description of the effects that the plague has on you, it's very much like this was this person's experience with it. Your mileage may vary. And you can kind of tie it into the person's backstory a little bit, you know, and that's kind of like one of those higher level GM things where you, if you want to make it personal, you got to work with the player. It's a two-way conversation.
Yeah. And it seems like the name, the dream, the epithet, I don't remember what we decided.
I don't know either. This is one of those situations where I've only ever read a word, and
I agree. But all of those things seem like they almost give the GM not necessarily like guardrails, but sort of a direction to go in with that. And you could get even more into that with the personal fears sort of conversation.
Yep. Oh, 100%. And every GM should be doing that, ideally. You know, that's what makes for a leveled up experience for the players. Because in the end, and I always say this, it's about the players more so than it is about the GM.
Yeah,
you know?
Absolutely. It's a joy to be able to, at least the way that I feel about GMing is it's like, it's so, I love to watch my players figure out things and have like fulfillment. Like, I was just GMing for my wife for it's her first time playing, and she figured out a puzzle that everyone else basically was like, that's not even a puzzle. Like that you're thinking about it too hard. And afterward, she came over and she was like, "Are you mad that I figured out your puzzle?" And I was like, "No, the
like,
puzzle's
please
meant
do
to
it
be
more."
solved. That's so cool."
Yeah. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Like that sort of satisfactory moment. That's when people get locked in for life, and that's when they start buying copious amounts of dice. You know.
Yeah, exactly. Those sorts of moments are when I got locked into GMing. Like I've played a few times, but I just can't give up that like rush of seeing them fulfill that. And this more like when I mentioned the Beckoning Dream earlier, and he did the tarot reading. And I immediately tried to start dissecting it. It's that very like Pathfinder D&D sort of mentality in my head of, okay, well, is this like my character? Is my character the dream version of me, or is it separate? And then I was like, no, just go along the ride for a moment. just to like go with your gut. And it seems like related to that sort of big swings.
Exactly.
Do you see in the horror? Yeah, I think you know where I'm going. It's like the horror feels like more of like a gut experience for the players.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Especially when it comes to games like, oh my gosh, especially games and scenarios like coming up against the dragon in Memento Mori, where it's like you can't fight. Your typical way of resolving this situation is not going to work. You know, your normal systems, you're used to D&D, throw it out the window. You're not going to survive this encounter. You're not going to survive this game. Try something else.
You're not going to learn its layer actions. This is...
Yeah. Like, its layer action is staring at you and you explode. Come on. Like, please. It's a god.
It erases you from reality. Let's move on.
Yeah.
And how do you go about... This almost might seem basic. When it is something so deeply personal, how do you go about balancing a party of people doing that, you know, going on these very personal journeys, not only in terms of, you know, I assume if people are at a table together, they've sort of signed on to have these sort of experiences next to each other, but just like balancing it within the pace of a session, you know, going back and forth. Is that challenging or?
Yeah. I think it's always one of those things that GMs are going to struggle with, where it's like, okay, you guys can't all have the spotlight all the time. In a game like Memento Mori, it is a little bit more difficult, especially because everyone has their own individual goal, and that is like the singular goal of each. Like they don't have side quests; they're dying. They don't have time for that. So I try and make sure that whenever every character goes through and creates their dream, they do so at a session 0 all together. And I try and find a way to make sure that they're all tied into the same end location, person, item, whatever, in some way. And I don't tell them this, but so that way, no matter what they do, they're always working towards all of their dreams at once. But that's not always possible. And so
So
whenever
you at
it's
least
not,
try to like put it on the journey, on the path somewhere.
and then I try and make sure that the players above the table also know that, like, sometimes someone's gonna have a session that's a little more focused on them, and then you'll have your turn next time. You know,
Which
when
should
you're-
be how it is at D&D, but there's a sort of a different expectation there of the party versus the individual.
Yeah, especially because timelines are so long and campaigns are so long. It's like sometimes you have to wait a couple weeks, a couple sessions to get around to something that you might find interesting, but that's just kind of how it is. And that's why I usually play with other D&D content creators, and I GM for other content creators. And so we're all really good about that, but when it comes to people who aren't used to the game, it can be a little harder.
Be a little bit more challenging, yeah. And I think that something like the dragon, or introducing these really like high level threats, it seems like to me early on could be a decent way at sort of baking that into their brains of you can't always get what you want, you're facing up against this, it's not possible.
Oh yeah, I am a firm believer that no matter what you're playing, the party should have some sort of humbling moment where they know what their upper limit is,
And they can sort of sense that as they go. But Memento Mori is so interesting because their upper limit is almost at the very beginning of the game.
It really is, yeah.
And then they're slowly just sliding off from there. Well, you've gotten me interested.
Okay, that's my plan, is to get people into games that are D&D every once in a while. There's some fun stuff out there.
Hell yeah. I mean, and I know even on a kind of separate note, in prep for this, I watched sort of in prep for this, but also what made me want to reach out to you was your TTRPGs, your indie TTRPGs video.
Yeah.
Which
Man,
I wrote
need
down
to make
like,
that part 3.
You have more?
Oh yeah, people keep seeing those videos and sending me more, and they're like, "Hey, we have this game that fills this niche," and I'm like, "I don't think I have any games like that yet." And it's like, queer storytelling in space, or another solo journaling game where you play as like a force of nature as opposed to a person, or something that takes instead of tarot cards, like a Jenga tower to do game. And it's like, there's so many different games out there, and they fill different niches, and no matter what, someone in my audience is going to be interested in something. So I just try and collect them all,
Yeah. Well, and that's, I think, the really big sort of takeaways. We've talked about how personal Memento Mori is and these horror games are, and that might not be everyone's cup of tea, but there is a TTRPG out there for you. You just got to convince other people to play it with you. That's the biggest challenge. And if the personal horror of Memento Mori sounds compelling to you, but you want a more tactical sort of feel to the action, I think Clockworld might have you covered. Peter from Tales of Elsewhere, thank you for being here. You are going to talk to us about Clockworld and a dragon inside of it, which I am very excited to see. Yours is actually, out of all of the ones that I've interviewed, yours is one of the ones that I had in my head when I was making this project, of a setting and system where a dragon doesn't seem to obviously fit.
Yeah.
And that was one of the things I was most excited to see, is like, how would people implement that sort of thing?
Yeah, and it was an interesting challenge too, because the dragon wasn't something I planned for the setting, but having to filter it through that lens is a really fun design challenge.
Yeah. And so I'm hoping that we see a lot about Clockworld through that. And I guess in terms of an elevator pitch for Clockworld, tell us about it.
Sure. So here are the taglines: post-apocalyptic, action horror, Weird West. So those series of words just make my heart sing, and I love that kind of stuff. So this is a very small niche, but long story short, it is a game and a setting that emphasizes sort of a visceral action horror feeling to it rather than, say, heroic fantasy.
Yeah.
And so the players are ordinary people drawn from normal walks of life, thrown into extraordinary and horrifying circumstances that they must then work together to survive.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, let's talk the dragon if you have it pulled
Yeah.
up. Yeah.
So the visual aid I sent, that's a blood oiler, which is basically a cybernetic zombie with crude oil pumping through it. Really gnarly creature.
Yeah.
And again, the oil industry in the late 19th century would have been on people's minds, all the oil drilling.
Yeah.
So these things are very deadly enemies in the rules. And so when I was trying to think of like what would I do for a dragon, I thought, what if a dragon was turned into a blood oiler? That sounds awful. Like absolutely horrifying. Because it's not just, an undead dragon. There's undead dragons all over the place.
Sure.
It is a cybernetic
Yeah.
monstrosity that instead of like breathing fire, what if it like breathes boiling oil? Or just something.
It's not
absolutely
just
awful.
it's not just a remnant of what this thing was in life. It has been brought back and twisted in the process.
Yeah, by some, malicious intent.
Yeah.
And so mechanically, I started thinking through what I could do and using my rule system, which is an injury-based system, right? You can get like arms torn off and all sorts of gnarly stuff. And what the Oilers want to do is abduct people and turn them into more blood Oilers. And so the thought came to me, what if this enormous dragon, its torso was basically a blood Oiler factory?
It's like a mobile walking factory,
Yeah.
like a command station.
Yeah, and it would grab players and try to drag them into the machine where it'll start like replacing pieces of them with cybernetics or something. Just so they'll have to try, you'll need to rescue the player if somebody gets snagged by it, right? Very quickly, as it'll start turning you into one of these very in a very it'll like kill you very fast. And so the dragon would be this big kind of set piece enemy where it's so large and so hard to hurt that the players are going to need to really pool their resources, because in my game, the players are just like, the local saloon owner who happens to have a shotgun, right? They're they're overmatched by things.
Definitely.
So, they would need to like get dynamite or big gunpowder barrels, try to like lure it close, just to be able to hurt it. Because when you're doing a horror game, you don't necessarily make enemies to be directly defeated. They're meant to be sometimes more of a puzzle that you need to survive and solve, because the players aren't assumed to be able to.
I think horror. This is pretty common within a lot of fantasy, but I think especially fantasy horror, the idea of the secret weakness. The vampire can be staked, the werewolf is weak to silver. These kind of horrific folklore stuff all kind of really often have that secret weakness that you can't go and mess up Dracula directly. You have to prepare. You have to learn the esoteric knowledge.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And you can't just spring this blood oiler dragon on the players out of nowhere and expect them to survive. It'll just, it'll just eradicate them. It'd be more like a set piece at the end of an arc. It attacks the town. They know it's coming. And it would all be about trying to protect the civilians from getting snatched up and turned into more monsters, as well as defeating.
Yeah, so I wrote down here, just looking over your quick start, the mechanics to me kind of all felt like they were really going towards a sense of autonomy and control. The way that the ranges work for the system of, close, medium, long, I don't remember the exact words, but they how close you are to the adversary that you're trying to affect gives modifiers essentially to the dice rolls. The fact that you can take an action mid-combat to treat a wound, and the purely sides-based initiative all of that led me towards this. It's a somewhat crude comparison, but in terms of D&D, it feels like almost all of the systems have a almost like great weapon master optionality to them.
Yeah.
Of like, in every situation, I feel like, it's like, oh, do I take the -5 for the +10 damage? Do I, you're constantly making those decisions. Was that purposeful, I guess? And if so, why? And you've somewhat answered with the horrific aspect, but if you want to dive even deeper into really heavily incentivizing that player autonomy.
Yeah, that's a great question. You definitely read the rules and understood what I was going for here by picking that out. It's really satisfying as a designer to have somebody read the rules, not be coached by me like over your shoulder, and then ask a really pointed question that is insightful. So I appreciate that.
Good. I'm glad.
So there's kind of a two-part answer. So one is sort of the player-facing rules that gives a lot of control is the first part. The more severe the consequences you want, the less reliant on randomization I feel you should be.
Sure. Yeah.
Like if you're going to punish, if the players are facing the blood oiler, right, or a blood oiler dragon, and you say the consequences is you lose a limb, right? If you fail to engage with this, I wanted the players to be able to have a toolkit that lets them figure out a way to solve that. And if they do pool their resources well and make some cool decisions, it reduces the impact of randomization. And they get to then choose the level of risk they like. So, with the distance controlling how hard it is to hit something and where you target on it, right? Going for
I didn't even mention that. Yeah, the built-in called shots.
Yeah, called shots. It's built in at the core of the system.
Yeah.
It means the players choose their own risk and reward because since they know how deadly some of their foes are, they get to really grapple with that. Yeah. And I want them to grapple with that.
Yeah.
Because the game is action horror, it's which is that even more narrow line. Like the movie Aliens is action horror, so the players are supposed to feel competent when they attempt things, if they attempt them well.
Yeah.
But they're also just people, right? So that's where having all of this control on the player's part comes from. I want them to have control because if they fail, it's bad.
Yeah.
So in each fight, it's not uncommon in a given skirmish that no player receives an injury. If they're playing smart, if they ambush, they're meant to be afraid of the consequences of failure, and I don't need to injure them if they're already afraid of it.
There's something that you've brought up a few times, and that was, I think it was step 2 or 3 in that, the Omens. Something that when I was first learning Blades in the Dark that really stuck with me for all of my games is one of the core GM advice for Blades is foreshadow danger. And you've talked about it almost every distinct point in this game is you want to foreshadow the threat because the threat is too big. So if it is not foreshadowed, it'll just kill them.
Exactly. Yeah. I've heard it described for trap design. I've heard it described as the click method, where instead of, you didn't roll perception enough, now you fall into the spike trap. It's the player is walking through the hallway and you hear a click. And then you freeze.
That's a good heuristic. Yeah.
Right?
I like that.
It's neat. Yeah. So then, we know something went wrong and everybody sort of freezes. We check what happened and then you have them, then you pass it to the players, right?
Yeah.
Have at it, players.
Well, and that's a
classic
media trope of the click. It's way cooler than if you step and it just goes off.
Yeah, right. And like I was saying, that way you can make the punishment for failure so much more severe.
Yeah, and something that we haven't talked about, and maybe the dragon will be, we can kind of talk about that to demonstrate this, is the rank system. It is not prevalent. It is everywhere in the system, the ranks. And it seems to me on first blush that this would be a really easy kind of almost player and GM guidance for you see a rank, you know what that means in almost any context.
Right, yeah. Whether it's how good you are at something, how hard something is, how tough an enemy is. Yeah, it's supposed to be ubiquitous to speed up processing, right? Because you can just say, if the GM says, wow, jumping across this chasm would be like a master rank test. You'd be like, okay, that's hard. You just know right away, even if you don't remember what the number is associated.
Yeah, you don't need in D&D there's a chart that I use all the time of a 15 DC is a hard challenge. You've just essentially flipped that and said a hard challenge is 15 DC.
Yeah. And I got some flack for it. Not flack, but I've gotten some feedback that why have the names at all when you could just have the numbers?
That was a question that I wrote.
It's a fair question. Yeah. And, it's like the idea of some people complain about D&D's attributes versus their bonus. Like, what's the point of the attribute when the bonus is the only thing you use?
Sure.
Fair criticism. And you have games like, I think like DC 20 just uses the bonus, if I remember correctly, not the attribute. I'm trying to remember. Some of these alternative D&D games just use the bonus.
I think Daggerheart just has bonus.
So. Yeah. And all well and good. And you could run the game. You could run my game without those words and just use the underlying numbers. But I like the evocation of the words for communicating concepts to the player. Because if I just say something is, without knowing the rules much, I could just say, you need a 12 or higher to succeed. That doesn't communicate anything until you start to look at the math and understand it. But if I say,
I have to do the math of like, what is a D10? How does a rider affect
what's my
that?
bonus going to be?
Yeah.
But if I say this is going to be extraordinary to succeed at it, that's going to make it sound, okay, that's hard, it sounds like.
Yeah.
There's communicating a fiction there that I just like. And the nice thing about making your own game is I can just sometimes make the wrong decision, like mathematically or whatever, because I like it. It's like my game now. I like the words. And I think there's something you lose when you go too far away from natural language rules and into pure mechanical rules.
Yeah.
I personally like when a game errs a little bit more on the natural language approach rather than strict mathematic approach.
I don't know, just looking at your system, and I'm not familiar just off the top of my head with how D10s interact with riders in maybe the same way I am with like the D20 at this point.
Sure.
But I looked at the rank chart and I immediately understood. I was like, oh, well, okay, like adept, layman, like I get it. That's easy. That's more difficult. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and that's what's interesting about, it's a challenge and is interesting about my system is there is no CR. In theory, because the players don't advance numerically, in theory, any threat could be used against any tier, any party. It just really depends on how prepared they are.
Yeah.
There isn't, so the Oiler Dragon, I wrote it as a legendary rank, which is way beyond what players could realistically fight themselves. So when that thing swings its giant metallic claws, and the player tries to hold up a little shield or something, you go wham! They're overmatched entirely by this. Simply because I always go way overboard first, and I'll reel in a design later. Well, yeah, if the players know that the best they can be is master rank, right? A character has one master rank skill, and they encounter an enemy that is also master rank. They know, okay, we're even, and that's scary. Yeah, they're even with my best, and that's intense. And we know intuitively that there's a lot of danger with that because they also know how many injury dice are rolled with a master when you're master at something. They know it's 4 because that's what they roll.
Yeah. And
that means there's a very high chance of getting critical injuries when you're a master at something. So they'll be like, okay, take this very seriously.
And so when it is all kind of standardized like that, you mentioned it earlier of the like quote unquote progression of characters is gaining these new edges, gaining these new kind of bespoke special features, seems like the equivalent for an adversary like the dragon is its attacks. How do you go about... What are the dragon's attacks, and how did you go about designing them to where they are appropriate and they are in line with the rank?
Well, like I said, I went big first. So one thing I knew initially is I wanted a way for the players to counteract some of its more deadly things. And so what I wrote is that there are these big oil tanks down its back, and if you destroy those, it can't spew burning oil. So like it has something that, because you can target in my game, right?
Right, that works in with the
having
called
things
shots.
that you can target can help.
Yeah.
So I gave it a basic claw attack because it's a dragon. Dragons have claw attacks.
Yeah.
It's extremely accurate because because it's such a high rank enemy, and if it connects, not only is it going to be very deadly, bleeding injuries, maiming injuries, which means if it hits you in the leg, it can take the leg off. It also knocks you far away, and if you not fall into something, you get a random injury too. So it's just like, I mean, getting clobbered by something that's 50 feet tall, if you're just some dude, is bad.
Yeah.
So I gave it just like a basic claw because dragons have claws. It has a spew oil breath attack where it spews boiling oil.
Yeah.
And if you don't get out of the way of that, which would be hard to do, right, to get out of the way, it applies the burning condition to you. And what burning says is every turn you take a random serious injury till you're dead. So you'll need to, and also I made it so you're also blind and choking on the fumes while you're burning. So just like really bad.
Yeah.
Well, like
It seems like you kind of go ham when it's legendary. Yeah.
Yeah, it's got to be horrifying. It's like just to tie it to like the Vox Machina animated show, when the big dragons show up and they're breathing their breath attacks, it's not like, oh, I took 5d6 damage. Like, no, these people were reduced to cinders from it. It's supposed to be like that with the oil, and it leaves behind this area of burning oil afterward as well, that if you slip and fall into, you'll get it on you, and so it makes a hazard every time.
Yeah.
Another classic is I gave it a tail swipe. Again, I like a D&D classic set.
Yeah.
So it's just got this big sweep that again just knocks people away into terrain. And one of the reasons that I made these attacks knock people afar, like 30 feet away, is actually to get them out of danger. It's a deadly attack that also pushes them away from the dragon.
Yeah.
So it's very dangerous, but afterward you are in theory safe.
Yeah, you're in a more advantageous position than you were
Right,
before.
so if you are really messed up, maybe you get a lethal injury from this, like maybe it's really bad, you are already away from the dragon so that a character could come up and try to treat your injuries or something, right? So it's dangerous, but it's meant to...
kind of going towards that autonomy of you're not trapping them in something that they can't get out of. Something bad happens to them, they get to reset.
Exactly. I mean, and if you're a character that's a melee character running up to this creature, why? But I didn't want them to sit there and get like claw, bite, dead.
Sure.
So after one hit, they're knocked away.
Right.
That's kind of the thing there.
Yeah.
And I gave it something. I love coming up with a name. I gave it intestinal tentacles because this thing's a cybernetic, right? And so out of the factory, these robotic grabbers come out, right, to grab, because the blood others are all about taking people, and it can grab from like 100 feet away. They'll snake out and try to grab you, and then slowly, I think I made it so it pulls them like 30 feet at a time.
Yeah.
So grab you from quite a far distance, and it starts to pull you in, and then the tentacles though are easy to destroy if somebody runs up and hacks them off. Kind of like my favorite D&D monster is the Roper.
Yeah.
So we're seeing some Roper design here. So that's one of its attacks. It pulls them in, and it can keep growing more of these if you sever some of them. I gave it a reaction where it can't fly because the wings are now robotic and it's can't fly, but it can block. It can do block reactions with its wings, which I thought was neat.
Yeah.
And so what the factory does is if you are dragged into the factory, you become restrained, and it's extraordinary to escape. So 12 or higher. So it's tough. You may need help.
I mean, I hear that from Extraordinary. Yeah.
Right? When it's extraordinary, it means a layman can't escape on their own, right? They have +0. And basically, if you end the player turn, if anybody ends the player turn inside, they get a random injury applied to them as like cybernetics are being like installed on them.
Cut
like
off,
in that one
cauterized, wired up.
Exactly. It's really gnarly stuff. And if it injures a limb significantly enough, it actually replaces the limb with a cybernetic attachment. There's a random table for arms and legs. So even if you escape, you could have like a drill arm.
Yeah.
Your arm got replaced by something.
Yeah.
So there's like, it could be like a hook or something crazy. So it replaces it with some crude and horrifying cybernetic piece.
It could be a brand new edge for that player.
Right? It's also like a really interesting storytelling moment. If the characters do survive, some of them will be like marked from this.
Yeah.
And I actually made it immune to things like compact ammunition, like low caliber guns are just going to bounce off this thing. So part of that whole the players need to prepare is they'll need to get like holy ammunition because this thing's undead. So like if they can go and get their bullets blessed by a priest, right? That'll help in this situation. Or get high caliber armor piercing weapons, explosives.
And is that pretty common throughout the system? Because we've talked about how the math is relatively simple. There's a lot of tactics. You're fighting things above your power, above your ken, and somewhat harkening back to those more classic horrors of you need to get silver. Are there how exactly do I phrase it? How much or how robustly supported are those preparation mechanics?
I gotcha.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's 3 tiers, so not rank, but 3 types of threats. There's minor threats, major threats, and unique threats.
Gotcha.
I'll tie this in. So a minor threat is like a bandit, a wolf. You shouldn't need any special preparation to deal with a minor threat. And the GM shouldn't feel like they need to over-prepare to run minor threats. Simple stat blocks, 1 or 2 attack. A major threat is something that poses significant risk to the players, regardless of rank, and has more abilities, requires more mental overhead for the GM, and should have some amount of problem solving the players are going to need to do. Maybe one part of their body is more resistant than others, or they have some vulnerabilities to exploit but aren't immune to certain things. So a blood oiler is a major threat. Having just like 1 or 2 of those in a scene is plenty. But the players can take on a group of bandits because they're minor threats. And then unique threats are a package of complexity.
Yeah.
Like
normally they're going to have like proper noun names.
Yeah, that'll be like, it's not an oiler dragon, it is the oiler dragon. Right? It is that one. And you just expect this to have all sorts of weirdness to it. Right? Like you're not going to be able to fight it in the normal way. So you as the GM know, I'll need to telegraph or allow the players that counterplay. And as the players, they'll know when something real weird comes out that they got to put their thinking caps on and not just try to blow it away. There's other things they're going to need to worry about. Like one of the threats is the Kentucky Sawbones, and it's a swarm of severed left arms, like in a trench coat. It's very strange. So, the players kind of put their hands on their holsters like, what do we do about this? It's not normal.
Yeah.
So there's that sort of assumption. So something like the Oiler Dragon would be a unique threat. It has this all sorts of immunities or strange vulnerabilities that the players will need to be prepared for. But everybody knows that that's how a unique threat's supposed to be run.
Yeah, and so there's, on the GM side, if you're running unique, you need to prep what the prep will be.
Exactly. You want to know how you're going to give this puzzle to the players to solve.
Yeah.
Instead of just like springing it on them and say, shoot.
Singing. The system singing or not singing. And one of, it seems to me, the advantages is that this is a system built around and with and like in concert with a setting. So, you know, when I'm asking about exploration or ecology, you're drawing on setting lore, right? That Devil's Breath, might not, you know, it might not make sense in another setting. So speaking of it singing or not, do you think that I'm sure the system will function without it, but in order to use the rules and the mechanics, do you think they more sing when paired with the setting?
Oh, that's my personal opinion on all games is that they're stronger when they're tied to a setting. And there's a world that they're trying to evoke, or at least at the very least a specific genre.
Weird
so
West.
like the underlying rules to the game are like just the numbers. If we leave all of the hazards and the monsters aside, just like how ranks work and how targeting works and how injuries work, that's well suited for action horror.
Sure.
It's not well suited for heroic fantasy.
Yeah. Lopping off a limb is not. I'm sure it's happened in his heroic fantasy, but not often.
Yeah. It's not a feeling of empowerment that heroic fantasy goes for, right? It's a different vibe. So those underlying rules I think would work in a lot of different settings, as long as those settings are thematically still like horror.
The right genre.
But again, in the Forgotten Realms,
right?
You know, that's not the stories of the Forgotten Realms, right? D&D with its epicness is a story.
I wish I got to see Drizzt with both of his legs chopped off at the end. That's what I really want to see.
Yeah, exactly. So that's kind of my answer there, is that I like when a book that I pick up feels like it's really tied to a cohesive world. That's my preference, because I have my generic, I mean, it's not technically generic, but I have my D&D rulebook, so I've got all like the high fantasy I need for a while.
Something that's been hit on a lot throughout these interviews, but especially with Clockworld, was the benefit of setting and how D&D doesn't really have that. Or at least 5e doesn't really have that. Because my last interview takes us back in time to D&D 2nd edition and the settings that used to provide so much value to it. Also, a small note that this was the first interview I filmed, even though it's coming at the end of the video, and a few things kind of changed about the format between this one and the others, so it ended up being quite a bit shorter. That is absolutely nothing to do with Mr. Welch or 2E. It is purely a result of how things changed over the course of filming. I'm excited to talk to you today about the Frelon, which immediately, compared to, I think it's going to be every other dragon on this list, I think this is the only one with a name. You know, coming from 5e, broadly, it's all, you know, green dragon, brass dragon, blank dragon. And then you sent me this one. You're like, oh, this is my dragon. And it's just has a name like any other monster, which is instantly interesting.
Not a dragon adjective. Or adjective dragon.
So what is it about the Frelon that you thought was, I mean, broadly interesting, but specifically, how does it fit into kind of 2E? Because there's a lot of things on here that I don't think anyone in 5e will recognize that certainly piqued my interest.
The Frelon dragon is basically Smaug meets the Xenomorph. It's a tiny little dragon that has the ability to sting you and insert its eggs, which will then dominate you for about a month before it hatches, tearing itself out, and then flying off to hunt more humanoids. And the story behind them, at least in-game, is that there was the Aranea, which was originally a Mystaran creature, but then he got Borged into the Forgotten Realms. And these were magic-casting spider folk. And they weren't the shape changers yet that everybody knows them as, for the people that are familiar with the Forgotten Realms stuff. There was also a race called the Chameleon Men, which was effectively take native Australians, turn them into lizard men, give them magical powers, and they just walked around doing, like, everything's great, we're fine. Like, and they're just chill dudes.
Yeah.
And then the Aranea, back to start one of the three curses, found out that the Aranea, or the Chameleon Men, or the Wallara, as they call themselves, knew about the spider's existence, and the Aranea were paranoid about anybody knowing who they were. So they cast a spell which was supposed to erase the memory of the Aranea from the Wallara, and instead of erasing the memory of the Wallara, they erased everything back of their memory back to the Stone Age. So the patron immortal, which is immortals are basically the Mystaran deities. The patron immortal of the Chameleon Men didn't like the fact that this happened to his favorite little race of people, and he responded in a calm, rational, and subtle way,
as deities are known to do.
Yeah, in the form of basically a tactical nuclear carpet bombing. As he ordered every dragon to get to the Harath, which was the Aranea homeland, and leave no stone on stone. And spell-casting spiders versus every dragon in existence. And then the Aranea were going to ground and hiding out. So they created the Freylon, which were only 7 foot long dragons. So they're not big. And their job is to hunt down and kill Aranea. So they're a very specialized dragon. And then the Aranea discovered the shape change so the dragons wouldn't hunt them. So now the dragons are hunting all the humanoids because they know the Aranea can only shape change into humanoids. If they kill all the humanoids in the area, they've killed all the Aranea, job done. Which sucks for all the other humanoids.
Yeah. There's something that struck me about this. It's the proper name, and it's even exactly how you started this of, well, we can't talk about the Freylon without talking about the book. And something that you've mentioned in one of your videos is the light speed pace that first-party content used to get released at. And something that really struck me about the Freylon specifically is how ingrained the lore and the context of them is within their stat block. Like,
oh yeah,
it would feel strange to run the Freylon if you didn't have the Aranea, at the very least in the world.
Yeah, and one thing for people not familiar with second edition, the Freylon entry in their Monsters Companion is 2 pages of lore, which is something you will not get today.
No.
And their stat block is about the same as a 5e stat block.
Well, and it even includes some things that I have long bemoaned the lack of exploration-related things in a lot of the 5e Monster Manual entries. And I saw things like activity cycle and organization and frequency, climate and terrain. And I mean, you have something like, the Xanathars in these biomes, you'll find these, but it's almost backwards from how it seems to be in second edition, where it's like second edition in the stat for the monster told you what biomes they go in. How does that exactly work into the fabric of 2E?
Oh, second edition is the gold standard for monster manuals. Always has been. Yeah. They go into the journalism, who, what, when, where, how. Who is this monster? What is it? What's it gonna, like the family unit when everybody arrives? How many are you going to encounter? What's its purpose? How does it function? It's like, what is it going to do in its daily cycle? Where are you going to find it? And it's like, what does it do? When you do encounter one. What does it do when it's not just being a monster?
Yeah.
And that was pretty standard for all the second edition Monsters Compendium books. But then again, they also broke down their books into much smaller ones. So you didn't have 500 monsters. You might have 100 monsters. But then you'd have like 12 Monsters Compendiums released one after another.
How did that exactly interact with the, I guess, mechanics of second edition? Because I've heard you talk about all of the different settings and talk about, like, it sounds like there were bespoke mechanics on like a per setting basis. Were the monsters almost set up in a similar way where the rule book was a little bit, not necessarily lighter, but a little bit secondary to the individual thing you were running in?
Well, they had, almost every setting had its own Monsters Compendium. And it reflected, like, I don't think Birthright got one, but Planescape was all extraplanar, obviously. Ravenloft was all Nightmare Fuel. Dark Sun had their list of, they had their monsters compendium, and it included all the rules for the psychic because all their monsters were psychic, and like all the horrible things they did. And Dark Sun was for monsters for people who didn't like their players. So the Freylon, as going to the dragons, they wouldn't fit in other settings. They have a very specific focus. Now you could shave off their history and just like, hey, it's an alien dragon.
Sure.
But it's the 2 pages of lore that made it that drew you to it.
Right. I mean, when I'm looking at this, I'm not drawn in by the fact that it has a special poison attack. I'm drawn in by the paragraph of ecology.
Oh yeah, that was the standard. The when I was doing a video comparing the 5th edition Griffin to the 2nd edition Griffin, the 5th edition Griffin has 2 paragraphs of lore. The 2nd edition Griffin had 11. So I recommend people that want to get monster lore, even if they're not going to play in 2nd edition, if they're playing in 5th edition, because the books are cheap if you get them PDF. And the lore gives you so much more to play with. You can get so much, you can get so many ideas reading the history and the ecology of the monster, rather than, hey, look, it's a half-page picture of a griffin.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
What's it eat? Meat.
Yeah.
So like sparrows, hedgehogs. If you don't have any lore, all you have to go on is the stat block, and then the stat block just means, okay, this is what you're going to do when you're trying to kill it.
Right.
What if you're not trying to kill it?
And I mean, it seems like the Freylon would probably be representative of that, of the strength of 2nd edition is its lore.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you so much to everyone who participated in this. Please stick around to see what all of them are up to. Also, thank you to Eden Main, whose editing skills made sure that this actually came out even relatively on time. It was a wild one. It was a long one. I learned a lot about interviewing and interviewing for a video and how those are kind of different. But anyways, regardless, stop by stream if you want to talk to me more about it, or just in general if you want to hang out. And I am going to go to sleep and play Marvel Rivals for like a few days straight. I'll see you next time. Bye. Well, that has been, I think, the interview. What a depressing note to end on, but the edit will do it more justice. Thank you so much for joining, Mr. Mike. Is there 2 questions for you? Is there anything that you want to say about D&D that you've never expressed in a video before, or that you've never been asked before? And 2...
Ooh, no, I don't think so.
Okay.
I make a lot of videos about D&D.
Fair enough.
If I was talking about a system that I wasn't as familiar with, that I wasn't as focused to, I think I'm the one who's going to have the lamest answer to that question, because I have a lot that I have yet to say about D&D, but I plan to. But I've also said a lot. I think by the time this comes out, I will have released my 300th video, or if not, it'll be out very soon.
Whoa.
So I have a lot of opinions about D&D. Most of them. Some of them applicable to other systems as well, but often all of them apply to D&D. So
Well, and that's speaking of your 300th video. Is there anything you want to shout out? Any projects? Anything you'd like more eyes on? Anything like that?
What can I say at this point?
That's exactly how the Chaosium dev answered. He was like, they're all unreleased.
Can I say 300th video should be out next week, if I mathed correctly.
And this will be released
or it's my Dragon Week, or no, it won't be my Dragon Week video. It should be out next week. Strange things are happening in the meta lore of my channel for those who've been watching. So come watch those videos. They're getting very weird.
Yeah, the Mike has a whole meta story and occurrences and events happening within the channel this year. that are very cool and
Yes.
feature a tiny little gnome man named Odwick. Or Ferryman. I don't know
The
what he
algorithm
is.
wizard.
The algorithm wizard. Right.
He's the algorithm wizard.
Exactly. All right.
And other very strange things that will have happened by the time this video comes out.
Yeah.
Which, well, it gets very strange,
Yeah.
but fun.
Yeah. Cool. Well, thank you again. And I will.
Alrighty. I will talk to you soon.
Yeah. Well, fascinating. And then last question. Is there anything that you have coming up that you want to shout out, either for Chaosium as a company or for you, Jason Durall? Because I so appreciate you personally for sitting down and talking with us.
Well, I mean, there's Age of Vikings, and then at least 2 projects that are on our hot development for that, which I can't name, but
Yeah.
and then the thing that has actually gone to press for BRP.
Yeah.
And that should be coming out. And we've got at least, I think, I mean, right now I'm in the weird position where I'm working on about 6 to 8 projects
Oh my
with
gosh.
Chaosium, and
Yeah.
I think almost all of them have not been announced yet.
Gotcha.
And so it's a little weird, and I've actually I took a step back from RuneQuest, and I'm focusing on BRP and Age of Vikings and Lords of the Middle Sea to get these projects moving again. And so, yeah, it's kind of weird. I would say, but marketing would have me,
Absolutely. Yeah. I guess the short, vague answer is to be determined. Keep your eyes on.
I'll say, I mean, we've got, our goal is to have a steady pipeline of products in support for all of the BRP based line.
Gotcha. And would you say those are going to be like kind of a steady, I don't want to say trickle, but a steady flow as opposed to a tidal wave? You're not going to drop.
Oh, yeah. We're not going to flood the market. I think that Chaosium, in the old days, there was this idea that, you just got to, as soon as a product is done, you got to get it out. You got to just get it out to the customers as soon as possible. And I think now the idea is we don't want to be at the point where, somebody's coming to the game store or ordering from us and they're like, oh, do I order the new Rivers of London book, or do I order the new BRP thing, which I'd like both, but money's a little tight.
Sure.
We don't want to be killing sales of one product for the other. I mean, and so also just from a promotional standpoint, it's nice to be able to lean in hard on one product at a time or a few at a time, and kind of keep people's interest going over a sustained period of time instead of like all at once or 5 or 6 books hitting the shelves at the same time.
Absolutely.
It sometimes happens that way because they're printed in clusters,
Mm-hmm.
or sometimes a bunch of new things come out at once for a convention. But for the most part, we try to
keep it steady.
Keep a steady release flows. Also, just from the standpoint of the company itself, it's better to have a steady revenue stream than have your money be going up and down all the time.
Absolutely, yeah. Okay. Yep. Well, thank you so much. I will be on the lookout for those new releases.
Cool.
And yeah, like I said, thank you for joining. Yeah. All right. And is there anything you shout out the Pocket Pals? You shouted out is there anything else you have coming up? Any projects? Anything you guys want eyes on?
So we have a Daggerheart actual play, as Matt just mentioned, with our friend Austin of Javelin Entertainment came to us. It's a campaign frame he wrote based on Hollow Knight. And it is so cute. So we by the time this drops, we'll have our session zero's already out. Our session, at least session 1 will be out, and then some. So that's a lot of fun. And then we go live. The way that we came to know each other, Jack, is for funsies, having no idea that Pointy Hat and Jenny D and everyone else involved was doing something called Dragon Week, and then had done Kraken Week last year. We just randomly, we do a live show every Friday at 12:30 Eastern, where we just come up with weird things to talk about loosely related to TTRPGs, right? So we decided to do like a March Madness style tournament of dragons, and boy, Heidi, did we ever learn that we did it wrong. Like our community had so many things to say.
So wrong.
About the dragons, and so now they're like, we're going to make this a yearly tournament, and it ended in an actual play live between the four. It's myself, Matt, Evan, and Fitz, where we each piloted a dragon to fight to the death.
That's cool.
Led by our good friend Kai Solis of Kai Solis Gaming, who you can also find on Start Playing. People are out there, I'm telling you.
We're out there.
Yeah, they're ready.
They're ready for you. We have a free Discord, we love meeting and connecting. Yeah, playing these games. So come hang out with us. We want to keep hanging out with you, Jack. It sounds like we need you on an episode 80HD20.
Would you be willing?
Yeah,
Okay,
absolutely.
Yeah. It's very easy. There's literally no script. Basically, rarely a script.
I'm not good with scripts, so that's good.
Yep.
Okay, good. It's how is your neurodivergent brain? How is it attracted to? How does it make gaming more difficult? How does it make it easier?
All of the coping mechanisms and their nice conflicts. And now that I'm medicated,
we'll put that on the books.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. So.
All of that. Yeah. So.
Sweet.
Let's do it. Let's do it for real. Because I would love to keep talking to you.
Absolutely. Yeah. Send me the info. I'm down.
Okay.
It was great talking to you. Do you have anything you'd like to shout out?
Absolutely.
Yeah, obviously the Beckoning Dream itself is a current project, but anything more specific?
Sure. Go check me out if you like my sultry voice. You can go find me on Tales of Initiative. We do actual play content Monday, Tuesdays, and Wednesdays with a bunch of like special events and stuff. I think this is coming out like mid-summer, so we will have just finished our like Pride Month cool charity campaigns. Go make sure and follow us there. We play the Beckoning Dream along with other cool games. We play some 5e. Yes, I run a horror campaign through Tales from the Yawning Portal. If you're into dungeon crawls with some Cthulhu-y goodness, I do that. Also on Wednesdays, we're playing a Fabula Ultima campaign. So if you like that JRPG, weeby Final Fantasy vibe, we're doing that on Wednesdays. We're having a great time. Cool. And yes, if you think Beckoning Dream sounds like a fun way to spend your game nights, look for it as part of Zine Club coming out from Plus One XP in the month of November. And if that release does really well, if everyone likes it, if everyone's jammed about it, then we'll probably follow it up with a like some sort of crowdfunder Kickstarter in early 2026. Right now I'm in the process of streamlining it down to a zineable length. So it's like, here's the quick start guide of TBD. Here's what you need to play this game. If it goes big, we would love to be able to make like a full like Thirsty Sword Lesbians style like soft cover A5 book, like something nice and chonky to hold in your hand. We've got a lot of cool ideas about like some print to play CC BY art based tarot decks. So like if you don't have a tarot deck, we want to give you the pieces you need to be able to print your own tarot deck and start playing. And for those that are visually impaired, one of our stretch goals, visually impaired, for one of our stretch goals, because like artwork is such a big theme in this game, right? But there's an entire crop of people that aren't going to get to experience that. What we'd love to do, if this crowdfunds enough, if we have enough of a budget, we want to make a audioscape tarot deck where every card would be a QR code to be able to play some sort of sound file that gives you like twinkling of bells, water running. It gives you enough sounds to pull from for audio-based guides and techniques and things that you could still be interpretive without having vision-based like graphics.
Right. That'd be so sick. That'd be so cool.
Lots of cool ideas. I hope we get there. I hope that everyone has fun playing it. That's the main thing, is that I really hope this opens the door. I want like people that are into tarot to like, this is an excuse to get them into TTRPGs, and vice versa. People that are into TTRPGs, it's an excuse to get into tarot.
I will say I can't say that I've ever been interested in tarot before, but reading over the playtest that you sent me and this entire interview, and especially the little demo that you ran, I caught myself. I was trying to pick apart of like, okay, well, is my dreamer me, or is it like a character? And I was like, no, just like interpret,
just vibe with it,
with it. And that was really cool. And I'm literally thinking to myself like, oh, maybe I'll get a tarot deck. I don't know. Seems cool. But anyways, thank you so much, Matt. Well, thank you so much for being here and talking about your dragon. Is there anything you have coming up besides Indie TTRPGs Part 3?
Oh man,
there-
eventually. Oh, now I have to do it.
I won't include that part. I'll cut it.
No, you can. Someone's gonna hold me accountable, and it's not gonna be me.
But yeah, do you have anything you want to shout out?
Gosh, there's so much. I do a lot. But if you don't know me, hi, I'm Diana the Rose, tabletop gaming creator. I think the next big thing will probably be some convention or another. There's PAX East, PAX West, PAX Australia, PAX Unplugged, Gen Con, things like that. So I'll be around. And I have been doing a lot of interviews lately. So if you Google my name, there's probably going to be 7 more videos about me talking into the abyss if you like things like this. So
if you want to hear more about, I don't personally know many like really horror focused TTRPGs, or not TTRPGs, but GMs, I guess.
yeah,
But
either if you find any, let me know.
Very
You
cool.
have one more question for me?
One more question.
Okay.
Shout out anything you're doing. I guess that's not a question. That's a command, I guess.
Yeah,
anything that you want more eyes on, you want more ears to listen to. What do you got coming
Sure.
up?
Well, I will say if the conversation we've had is intriguing to anybody, we were talking about a quick start guide. There are free, pretty, I'd say decently high quality materials people can download on the Tales from Elsewhere website. It's just talesfromelsewhere.com. There's a quick start, has the basic rules, has an adventure that's a pretty meaty adventure. There's also a packet that lets you make your own characters and get a sample of that. It's less than 40%, I think, of the total character creation options. But like what the game is largely available for free to people to sample. So that's what they can go and try out right now. The plan is to do a crowdfunding campaign later in the year for all the artwork I want.
Yeah.
Because the artwork, you'll see it in the quick start packets. There's some like rad art that I've gotten. I want.
And then there's there's a little box of call out text that I thought was funny. It's like, why is this page so empty? And and you're
It's
like,
there's
well, I
gonna be
want to
art for
fill it with
this.
art.
Yes, and I've got a number of very talented artists. So later in this year, there's going to be a crowdfunding campaign, basically to fund artwork. That's primarily what it's going to be for, and hopefully a print run. So yeah, if that all sounds cool, I'm on YouTube. I've got a website.
Cool.
I'm everywhere.
Very cool. Well, thank you again for joining, and
A
check
genuine
out
pleasure. Thank you.
Clockworld. Well, is there anything that you want to shout out before we wrap it up? Anything you're working on? Anything coming up?
I'm working on the Mystara DMG, but if you want to get a free copy of the Mystara Player's Handbook, which is 5th edition compatible and far superior to anything that Wizards has released for a system book, you can get it at freemystara.com. It's available in English and Italian.
freemystara.com. That'll be in the description.
Okay.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much. And
Thanks a lot.
yeah. See you later.